We're beginning to realize the astounding benefits of just exercise. I mean, people don't want to think that exercise can be the greatest antidote to death, but it is. I mean, it reduces your cardiovascular disease risk. It reduces your risk of falls and breaks in later ages. It improves your cognitive function, your mood, your emotional state, your digestion, everything. I have a saying that aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. The more aggressively we pursue comfort, the faster we age. If you don't load your bones, they don't strengthen. If you don't tear your muscles, they don't grow. If you don't challenge your immune system, it weakens.
Okay, we got Gary Brecka. Gary, who are you? Tell us who you are.
Well, I'm in your basement.
I know you're in my basement. I know who you are, but how would you describe who you are? Because, I don't think your little 2-sentence bio really kind of explains the wealth and gamut of information that you provide.
Oh, thank you.
It's true. But one funny thing, not funny actually, it's the opposite of funny. What I thought was super interesting that I think I'd love to start with is this idea of you being a mortality expert, and that you can literally pinpoint someone's lifespan by a month. Now, can you just talk about that?
So first of all, I'm a human biologist. I'm not a physician. So my undergraduate degrees were in biology. My postgraduate degrees were in human biology. So I got a separate degree in human biology. And then for 20 plus years, I was in the mortality space for big life insurance companies. And I get a lot of flack about that. But people say, well, if you could predict mortality to the month, you'd be Jesus, or you would have won a Nobel Prize. But the truth is, it's some of the most accurate science in the world. It's not my science, but it's some of the most accurate science in the world. I mean, if you want to know how accurate life insurance companies are at predicting death, just look at what happened in the 2008, 2009 financial services crisis. We had, 364 banks fail? Not one life insurance company failed. I mean, a valid death claim in America has never failed to have been paid. I mean, life insurance companies are some of the most solvent institutions on the planet, and they take risk that no other financial services enterprise would even come close to taking, because they put all of that risk on one variable. I mean, when they put a $10 million or $25 million, and I worked on the jumbo life side, which is large life insurance policies. We rarely saw policies below $5 million. But when they put 10 or 20 or 25 or $50 million worth of risk on your life,
right,
only one thing matters. I mean, how many more months do you have left on Earth? And everybody's on an actuarial curve. You're on one, I'm on one. Everybody listening to this podcast, if you're a 35-year-old male, you have a general life expectancy of X. But a life insurance company doesn't care where you are on an actuarial curve. They want to know your specific mortality. And so in order to come up with that, they look at 5 to 10 years of medical records. They look at your demographic data, and then they look at a recent blood test. And essentially what they're doing is they're working backwards, because you have to understand that all human beings leave this earth the same way. We all die of the same thing. The definition of death is hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. So when you can no longer sustain brain function, that's essentially what we call death. So if we know that everybody dies of lack of oxygen to the brain, dies of hypoxia. Now, it might be a gunshot wound, a car, a bus, a heart attack, stroke. There are lots of ways that could happen. Then we start from that endpoint and we work backwards. You see, life insurance companies have information that no other university, the CDC, the FDA, no clinical study of any kind has, because they know the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for hundreds of millions of lives. So they know what happens when you take a painkiller and are unaware that has an addictive amyloid, and now you're starting down the track of addiction. They know that if you take corticosteroids for inflammation, that initially that's going to lower your inflammation, but eventually those are going to eat your joints like a termite, and they're going to result in a joint replacement. They'll even schedule the joint replacement behind the scenes for you 6 years and 1 day after you start corticosteroids. If you want to watch the trajectory of what's happening with vaccines, just watch how life insurance companies start to table rate people that are either vaccinated or boosted or double boosted or quadruple boosted, because they have mortality data, right? So they go off of hard mortality data. I always would say that if the database that I used to work in could just see the light of day, it would permanently change the face of humanity.
And they cannot obviously release that, right? Because it's...
No, they won't release that because they're the polar opposite of Google and Facebook, right? They collect voluminous amounts of information, but they use it to price financial services products, but they don't use it for
good, really.
For the public good. And eventually for me, after being in that industry for a very long time, I began to realize that there was human beings on the other side of these spreadsheets. It wasn't just data. And, the very interesting thing is that, one of the ways that you go from being on an actuarial curve to having what we call specific mortality is there's like a credit and debit system, right? Okay. So if you have diabetes, you get a debit. It's a mortality factor. If you're obese, you get a debit. If you have hypertension, you get a debit. But if you're morbidly obese and diabetic,
right,
it's not just 1 + 1 + 1. It's 1 + 1 + 1 = 10, right? And a lot of times we're able to see metabolic syndromes and coronary artery disease building in very, very young people that we knew was going to result in a catastrophic event.
But you're not allowed to tell them or warn them or explain to them.
That was the real downside of that industry. We were prohibited by law from having any contact with the patient or the treating physician.
So not even to put it in a public setting, but just to tell the person wait, hold on, you're doing this, which we have the data to show. If you keep on doing it this way,
it drove me crazy.
You can't do anything.
Even if we saw life-threatening drug interactions, we couldn't contact the patient. So
wow.
I would have been criminally prosecuted potentially for that. So when you're looking at this voluminous amount of data and you see, for example, somebody has anemia, right? So they're anemic, which means essentially their blood is very low on oxygen. So they're exhausted, they don't sleep well, they're tired, they have no stamina. And they're being treated over and over and over again with the same sequence of events, iron, B12, folic acid. But you realize that they have a gene mutation where they can't absorb folic acid. So if they just changed the type of nutrient they were using to something called methylfolate, for example, in many cases that anemia would just eviscerate. But you couldn't even contact the patient to tell them that. We would see patients all the time that were diagnosed with a long-term clinical deficiency in vitamin D3. You could see it in the medical record for over a decade. And now they're exhibiting rheumatoid arthritis-like symptoms. Now, they don't have rheumatoid arthritis, but in the hands of the wrong primary care physician, when they give their patient history, it parallels rheumatoid arthritis so exactly that they get told they have rheumatoid arthritis, they get started on a corticosteroid, and we knew that if you started oral corticosteroids, you had basically 6 years and 1 day until you were having a joint replacement. And so now, you're diagnosed with a condition that you don't have. You're put on a medication that you don't need. It causes you to have a joint replacement that wasn't required. And this reduces something called your ambulatory profile, which is how well you ambulate, how well you move. And as you reduce ambulation, right, as you reduce mobility, remember, sitting is the new smoking, right? Sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality. We're really starting to thoroughly understand the implications of muscle latent age, fighting something called sarcopenia, age-related muscle wasting. But as you get 6 years and 1 day from starting corticosteroids, which you didn't need, you're now having a joint replacement. So now you reduce ambulation, mobility, and now you bring forward diseases from your future, right? You borrow from the future and you start to bring forward all of the diseases that exacerbate with reduced mobility. So you exacerbate cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, arteriosclerosis, multisystem organ failure, hypoxia, all of these things that you otherwise wouldn't have had if you had just known that you had a simple nutrient deficiency. Clinical deficiency in vitamin D3, the sunshine vitamin, the only vitamin that human beings make on their own.
Okay, so I guess I'm still stuck on the fact that why is it illegal, and this is maybe something it's not really what you do, but why would it be illegal to tell the person, what's the reasoning behind not being allowed to tell the person?
The reasoning behind it wasn't so sinister. The basic reasoning behind it is they didn't want someone like me who is not licensed to practice medicine to be contacting the patient and interrupting the care of medicine if they were under the care of a physician.
Right, okay.
But physicians and modern medicine isn't perfect. I mean, none of us are perfect. I mean, there's a medical information bureau that's meant to catch things like contraindications in in prescriptions, or people that are pain med surfing, things like that. But it's not a perfect system. And so patients that move from state to state, they transfer care between cardiologists. Let's say they live in the Midwest during the summer months, and they live in the South during the winter months. Maybe they go from Michigan to Miami, and they transfer care back and forth. Very often, in the patient's best interest, physicians are trying to do their best job, but they write a script that's contraindicated to each other. I see it a lot. Again, I'm not licensed to practice medicine, but more than a massive handful of times, we've been working with a patient, our clinical team's been working with a patient, and they have a kidney doctor, and they have a primary care, and they have a cardiologist, and they all have them on either similar or very dissimilar medications that conflict with one another.
But what I find interesting, there's like a lot of noise around the fact, like there's like, I think there was a stat, like there's medical error is probably one of the top.
It's the third leading cause of death in America. There's a 2016 Harvard study. There's a 2016 Harvard study and a 2019 Johns Hopkins study, which is actually worse than the Harvard study. But that medical error, medical misdiagnosis, is the third leading cause of death. So modern medicine is resulting in the death, of more people than morbid obesity and diabetes combined. Only cancer and cardiovascular disease kill more people than medical error.
So then, but yet, when there's alternative people talking about different ways to cure yourself or help or prevent, it's still considered to be alternative, conspiracy theory, all of these like negative connotations, which I've yet to understand why. Well,
I mean, the whole, practice of medicine is driven by reimbursements. I mean, for a physician to get paid. And again, there's not a whole sort of sinister pool of physicians that are out there to prey on patients. They work hard, they go to school, they get educated about chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals. So that's the box that they understand. And we're very good at crisis management. If I hit a windshield at 25 miles an hour, I want a surgeon, I want painkillers, I'm going to the ER.
Right.
But we're not good at the preventative side, right? We know now that cardiovascular disease begins much, much decades earlier in life than we ever thought. We know that things like the amyloid plaquing in the brain that lead to Alzheimer's and neurogenic disorders begin very, very early in life. If we spent more time talking about mental fitness rather than mental illness, we would have much less mental illness.
Absolutely.
Right? And we're beginning to realize the astounding benefits of just exercise. I mean, people don't want to think that exercise can be the greatest antidote to death, but it is. I mean, it reduces your cardiovascular disease risk. It reduces your risk of falls and breaks in later ages. It improves your cognitive function, your mood, your emotional state, your digestion, everything.
You're singing my song right now.
And, sedentary lifestyle, like I say, is a leading cause of all-cause mortality. I have a saying that aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. The more aggressively we pursue comfort, the faster we age. We have to stop telling grandma not to go outside, it's too hot, not to go outside, it's too cold, just to lay down, just to rest,
relax,
to eat at the very first pang of hunger. I mean, this is dismantling all of our defense mechanisms.
Right.
I mean, there's a process in the body called hormesis, a well-documented, well-researched process where the body is stressed and responds in a way of strengthening. Right? I mean, the whole idea of going to the gym is to tear a muscle. Right? You don't have muscle hypertrophy unless you've torn it, or muscle hyperplasia.
Right.
If you don't load your bones, they don't strengthen. If you don't tear your muscles, they don't grow. If you don't challenge your immune system, it weakens.
Is that why the cold plunge, for example, is so popular, right? Because it's so jarring to your nervous system that then it actually strengthens and enhances your immune system? Is that why?
No question. And the thing is, the difference between, remember, when we use cold water immersion or, cold therapy, which I'm a huge fan of. I take a cold plunge every single day. Even when we're in Colorado, we don't, I can't plug a cold plunge in because we have solar fed water. So what I do is I take the, 43-degree glacier water, I put it in a cattle trough. I went to Tractor Supply, got a $165 tin cattle trough,
Right.
and I fill it with glacier water and get in it every day. The idea is
How
to
long? 3
shock the
minutes?
body. 3 minutes minimum, 6 minutes maximum. Remember, we don't want to be cold adaptive. We're not trying to adapt the body to cold. We're trying to shock it. So like, for example, if every single day you walked in your house, your husband was hiding around the same corner and he went, boo, every single day. Eventually you would adapt to that
Right.
scare signal.
My daughter
right?
does that to me
Okay.
every
Okay,
My
so
8-year-old.
you're adapted to it.
Yeah.
So, cold, when we get in cold water, a whole multitude of things happen, but there's a massive peripheral vasospasm, right, which drives all that oxygenated blood into the core, liver,
Right.
lungs, pancreas, kidneys, up to the brain. This kind of oxygen flow to the brain only happens during deep delta waves of sleep. And we activate something called brown fat, which is our thermostat, right? Which actually can raise your metabolism. It can result in increased fatty acid metabolism. We also release something called cold shock proteins from the liver. And these are reserved proteins that are held in the liver. They're for extreme situations. When we immerse ourselves in cold water, which is, remember, water is 29 times more thermogenic than air, meaning it removes heat from the body at 29 times the rate of air. You can die in 72-degree water. You can't die in 72-degree air.
Yeah.
You can get hypothermia. So when you get in cold water, the idea is to shock the body, don't adapt to that process, and get out. That's why 3 minutes minimum, 6 minutes maximum. I haven't seen any research that colder is better or longer is better.
Really? That's why? Because people are always like, I did 8 minutes, and they're all proud of themselves,
I mean, I don't know if you saw the big UFC article going around, that Dana White was absolutely irate. It was actually my cold plunges, but Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler were in 37-degree water for more than 30 minutes because they were taping a show. And
How long were they in for? That's a long time.
over 30 minutes.
They were in for over 30 minutes.
Yeah, and the majority of people listening to this podcast, unless you're a world-class athlete, could not survive that drop in core body temperature. So it's dangerous. I mean, I see people on Instagram all the time. They're going in 37-degree water with a snorkel, going underwater and trying to stay under there for 10 or 12 minutes. I go, that's crazy. Your brain is this far inside the surface of your skull. It's not good to freeze it. It's not good to bake it.
Right.
So you get into cold water, 48 degrees, 50 degrees is plenty. Get in for 3 minutes minimum, 6 minutes maximum, get out. You'll get a release of cold shock proteins. You get a peripheral vasospasm. You'll get a massive dump of endorphins. It'll enhance your mood, your emotional state. You'll activate brown fat. And you'll turn your thermostat back on. I call it my drug of choice. You're high from that for 5 or 6 hours.
Oh, easy.
It's amazing.
Now, do you find, is there a better time to do it? Is it to maximize the benefits? Like if you're doing
Yes.
it on an empty stomach in the day, morning, is there?
First thing in the morning, as early as you can in the morning before you exercise. I mean, I fight with a lot of strength and conditioning coaches about this.
Yeah.
And luckily, Human, I think, has put out some great information on this. I think he actually led a Stanford study or reported on the Stanford study. But
Are you friends with him?
no, but I'm a huge fan of his.
Yeah.
Huge fan.
You should be on his podcast.
I should.
Yeah.
Huberman, if you're listening,
Huberman?
invite me to your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, he's great.
No, but I'm a huge fan of his, and if you think about just what does the body do naturally when you exercise, right? So let's say you did a big squat workout and you just tore a bunch of quad muscle.
Yeah.
What's your body going to do? It's going to send more blood flow, more amino acids, more oxygen to that muscle. It's going to clear something called creatinine, muscle breakdown product from that area. It's going to bring amino acids. It's going to bring oxygen. Why would you want to shut that process down, right? Why would you want to put yourself in cold water and strip all of that blood out of that muscle? So now you've shut the healing process down. So unless you have an injury, it's good to ice an injury. If you have a ligament or tendon or strain, then by all means ice it after exercise. But getting in cold water will actually inhibit your myofibril repair, the protein synthesis. And so, putting athletes in cold water before exercise is much better than after exercise. In fact, making them hyperthermic after exercise or putting them in red light therapy will significantly enhance their recovery.
So wait, I do all this stuff, right? So that's why I'm curious. I have like the clear sauna. I have I've got cold plunges. I have the
Theralite 360?
No, the Theralite 360 is part of a Superhuman Protocol that a friend of mine actually just started like a few days ago in LA.
Oh, it's amazing.
I don't understand any. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about
I'm
that.
a huge fan of red light.
Because the red light, me too, but isn't there like the protocol? We're going all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but the Superhuman Protocol. It's lying on this PMF mat, right?
PMF.
And then you're on a
Oxygen.
bicycle with oxygen for 3 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. And then you go into that red light, right?
Yes.
Now, in that, and this is the reason why I'm asking you, like, in the order that you're doing something in any of these modalities, does it enhance and benefit you?
Yes, the order enhances it tremendously. So if you look at the Superhuman Protocol, first of all, the Superhuman Protocol is basically taking everything from Mother Nature that's good and bringing it inside.
Okay.
So you can get a Superhuman Protocol, or I'll teach you how to do it for free.
Yeah, teach me how to do it for free.
Okay, so first, the Superhuman Protocol is magnetism, oxygen, and light. Okay. And one of the fascinating things that I'm finding, now running in some very elevated circles with some of the top biohackers and anti-aging longevity experts, some of the greatest researchers on the planet, is that everything is coming full circle. And by that I mean we're really realizing that we need to get back to the basics in order to address longevity, in order to address aging, in order to address optimal health. And by the basics, I mean the further we get away from Mother Nature, we get magnetism from the earth, we get oxygen from the air, we get light from the sun. We were meant to spend more than 90% of our time outdoors. Now, or more than 80% of our time outdoors. Now we spend more than 90% of our time indoors. So the light is different. We're not getting, the truth is most of us are not getting enough sun. It's not that we're getting too much sun.
Right.
And so think about the last time that you had bare feet touching bare soil, like dirt, grass, sand. That's the last time you discharged into the earth.
Right.
So the pH range of the body is very narrow. It's about 4 or 5/10 of a point. We want to be slightly towards the alkaline side. It's a complete fallacy that you can get alkaline by drinking alkaline water. Okay, that's the biggest marketing myth ever sold to the public.
What's the best water? Then it doesn't matter. We can just drink regular spring water.
The best water, if you really want the best water, it's hydrogen water. You want to add hydrogen to your water. I use something called an echo water filtration system. But if you look at the research on hydrogenated water, there's an entire class of bacteria in your gut called hydrophiles. You can increase hydration. You can increase the absorption of supplements, of foods, of minerals. It helps with the enzymatic activity in the stomach. Hydrogen water is in a category, in my opinion, all of its own.
And where do I get it? How do I make it? What do I do with it?
Well, I use something called an echo water filtration system myself. In fact, in my bag, I have a portable hydrogen generator, and I will take bottled water and put it in there and hit a button, and 4 minutes later, it makes hydrogen water. But if you don't want to spend the money on getting them because these machines are a few grand, then Mountain Valley spring water is I would say in a glass bottle is probably at the epitome of water that you can drink.
Okay, good to know.
But if we get back to the basics, the magnetism that we get from the earth can actually change the pH of the body. Right? pH stands for potential hydrogen. It's a charge. So if we want to change the charge, we need to run a low Gauss current through the body. This happens by touching the surface of the earth, or you can do it by laying on a PEMF mat.
Right.
Pulse electromagnetic field.
I have this one by Therasage. Have you seen this one?
No, but I'll probably. When I get them, I send them to a third-party lab and I have them tested. I'm astounded. There are some great PMF mats out there. The one that we use is called a Pulse, but there are several that I've tested that actually had serious dirty frequency coming out of them, and they even attracted Wi-Fi, microwave, radio wave, 5G into the mat. They drew it into the mat. So it's important that certain PMF mats are meant to actually provide a current that can create a muscle contraction,
right?
Which is great for like a muscle spasm and whatnot. But the one you want to use daily is a PEMF mat that runs a very low Gauss current through the body. It will alkalize all 32 trillion cells in the body. It will help create some vasodilation in your microcapillaries. It will reduce inflammation. And it's akin to laying on the surface of the earth. It's akin to sleeping on the ground. And then you get oxygen. And the second part of the Superhuman Protocol is this oxygen therapy called Hypermax. And basically, it's a 900-liter bag that you can fill over and over again with a oxygen concentrator. And you get on a cycle and you breathe this oxygen for 10 to 12 minutes, a short period of time, so you don't adapt. You don't actually start to lower your red blood cell count. It's actually called multi-step oxygen therapy. And there's some phenomenal science behind it. Dr. Otto Warburg was one of the big lead researchers. I think he actually won a Nobel Prize for it. And multi-step oxygen therapy is perfusing the tissues with oxygen, right? So, but again, people that don't want to spend that money on a hypermax oxygen system, which is the Cadillac, can learn to do breath work. So get out, touch the surface of the earth with bare feet, learn to do breath work. I do a Wim Hof style of breath work.
Yeah.
Again, both of these things are free. Expose your skin to sunlight. Don't be afraid of the sun, especially first light, because there's a very special type of light in the first 45 minutes of the day. There's no UVA, there's no UVB light, so there's some damaging rays in the first 45 minutes.
What time is this at?
Right as the sun crests the horizon for the next 45 minutes. So we call it first light.
First light. Okay.
Yeah, first light. So the Superhuman Protocol is magnetism, oxygen, and light. If you want the convenience, get a PMF mat, get a hypermax oxygen, and get a red light therapy bed. If you want to do it the way that God intended for us, you can walk on the surface of the earth, you can do breath work, and you can expose your skin to sunlight first thing in the morning. And you can do all of those things at the same time if you have a backyard.
Yeah.
And stop worrying about whether or not it's too hot or too cold or it's raining or it's anything else. Your body will make it for 8 or 10 minutes.
Right.
You're fine.
So you're doing the PMF mat for how long?
So what I do is I put the PMF mat in my bed. So I lay it right on top of my mattress. And when I go to bed, I turn it on a setting called Tranquility. It runs a low Gauss current through your body. It helps you get into a deep delta wave of sleep. And then you not only wake up refreshed every day, but you wake up alkaline. And then I walk down the hallway or I go out on my deck and I do 10 minutes on the bike, breathing
in
92
the
to
oxygen,
93% O2, which is called EWAT, exercise with oxygen therapy. There's an enormous amount of science behind that. If you go to my Instagram, I put links to all the peer-reviewed articles. And then I go immediately into a red light bed. And red light therapy, in my opinion, is the rage in longevity and anti-aging because it has a profound effect on the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. And when certain wavelengths of light, particularly 810 nanometers, pass through the skin and pass through the cell wall, they cause the mitochondria to release a certain gas called mitochondrial nitric oxide, and it causes oxygen to dock. And I have a saying that, the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. And nothing is more truthful than that saying. Almost every disease etiological process that we saw in the insurance space either had its roots in a lack of blood oxygen or it was exacerbated by a lack of blood oxygen. I mean, if you look at all kinds of neuropathic disorders and, mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, dementia, they all have a hypoxic component to low blood flow, low blood oxygen. Cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, arterial sclerosis, all of these conditions, type 2 diabetes, have a link to poor blood flow and poor oxygen levels. So red light forces oxygen into the mitochondria. And if you think about it, 10% of your body weight is mitochondria. You got about 110 trillion of these things in the human body. And this is where we get our energy from. We're not really powered by the food we eat and the air we breathe and the water we drink. We're powered by one source of energy called ATP.
Right.
This is made in the mitochondria. And if we can enhance mitochondrial function, this is the genesis of how we can reverse the aging process.
So then if we don't have a bed to lie in, right? Most of us don't. Where else can we get red light? Like there's all those, I know I have panels. You have like little panels, small panels.
Yep.
Again, I have this, I have red light by the same company, Therasage, but
Yep.
It's a tri-light and it's like, you can put it on your body, you can take it off, put it
Great.
anywhere else. Like where else, does it matter in your opinion, where you're getting it from? Like there's other people
Yes.
also who have it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're not the only ones that have
Right.
red light
No,
therapy.
no.
but-
What I'm saying is like, where do people, like the average person, the average Joe listening to this podcast who doesn't have access to, let's say, the bed
Okay.
or to what I have or what anybody has, what's the most cost effective way?
Let's start at zero and then work our way
That
up
sounds
to,
great. That would be great.
You have an endless budget. if your budget is zero,
Yeah.
and then you want to be grounding, earthing, you want to be contacting the earth for 6 to 15 minutes.
Though, yeah.
And then you want to be exposing your skin to sunlight.
Sunlight for sure, yeah.
In the first 45 minutes of the day. And that can be your exchange for red light therapy.
Oh,
so
it
that's
could
going to cost
exchange.
you it's going to cost you zero.
Got it.
Right. Next, you would want to invest in a red light panel. We have the most powerful red light panel on the market. It's 2 red light panels. You can lay underneath of them. You can set them up. You can set them beside you while you're working. You can lay under them for 20 minutes during the day. But there are lots of good manufacturers that make red light panels. You want to make sure that it has the 680 to 720 nanometer wavelength. You want to specifically make sure that it has the 810 nanometers and 940 nanometers. In my opinion, these are the most researched and therapeutic wavelengths of red light. So if you can find those in the manufacturer's brochure and it says we have these wavelengths, then you probably have a decent red light panel. Mm-hmm. And those will run you anywhere from $15,000 to $18,000, depending on the power and the size. And then red light therapy beds will go all the way up to $120,000 from there.
And in my sauna outside, right? Mm-hmm. It's because a red light sauna. Is that effective?
Yes, because if you have an infrared sauna, because remember the body has 2 types of sweating, right? We have passive sweating and active sweating. We passively sweat to reduce body temperature. We actively sweat to eliminate waste.
Right.
So you want to actively sweat. If you're going to spend time in a sauna, preferably it would be an infrared because there's more active sweat. There's more waste elimination than just heating up to try to cool down.
So, I think it was on Andrew Huberman's podcast. I don't know. It was Andrew Huberman's podcast that he was saying that the sauna, I thought my sauna, the one outside, was not hot enough because he was saying the hotter, the better. The whole rage right now is having these barrel saunas that are at 200 degrees versus this infrared that goes to 165 or 170.
Right.
There's a lot of controversy around the effectiveness of this.
I think that there's a lot of positive, non-controversial information about saunas. I mean that increasing longevity, reducing cardiovascular risk, improving mood,
regardless of
waste,
the kind.
Regardless of the kind. The thing that I would caution people against is very hot environments for prolonged periods of time are not good for you. Again, remember that your brain is only 1/4 of an inch inside the surface of your skull.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It is not good to bake it. It's not good to freeze it. And so
I sit in there for 30. My friends are sitting in these things for 30 minutes.
30 minutes at 200 degrees to me is
220 in these. Haven't you seen these barrels all over the place? I'm going to show them to you when I get off this podcast with you. It's all the rage.
Here's a good idea. Just set your oven at 180 degrees or 200 degrees.
Put your hand in it.
And take 6 eggs in the shell and just set them on a pan and put it in there for 20 minutes and take them back out and see what's happened to the egg. And understand that your brain doesn't have much more protection than that. If you really want to do a better experiment, then take it and wrap it in a towel that's an inch thick and put those eggs inside of a towel that's an inch thick and put it in the oven at 200 degrees and leave it in there for 40 minutes. When you take it out and you unwrap that towel and you look at that egg becoming hard-boiled, decide whether or not you want that same insulation for your brain. You want to expose your brain.
Well, they wear these sauna hats.
Okay, the sauna hats will help.
Sauna hats, the wool sauna hats is the thing.
But
right?
Again, we're not trying to adapt to heat, just like we're not trying to adapt to cold. We're trying to shock the body and have a hormetic response, right?
Yeah. But everyone's extreme, right? It's like
everything's extreme.
If 170 is good, then 220 must be better, right?
We think that with weight. We think that with a lot of body movements. This is why there's so many injuries in sports that are not supervised, like CrossFit. I used to own a CrossFit gym. I finally sold the gym because I realized it's very hard to teach an average person compound Olympic movements. And I don't have an issue with heavy weight, and I don't have an issue with speed, but I do have an issue with speed and heavy weight. Deadlifting for time, overhead snatching for time. This has a severe risk of injury. And because a small part of the populace can accomplish it successfully, does not mean that this should be put to the masses.
100%.
Right? And so I feel the same way about saunas and cold plunging. It becomes like almost like an ego contest. Well, I got in at 37 degrees. I got in at 32 degrees. I got in at solid ice.
Well, that's what's happening though. Seriously, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
People are just like, screw that. I'm just going to get like 10 bags of ice and put it in. And that's what I'm going to do. And like, it's becoming very, very trendy, right?
Yeah.
That's what's like all these things, even though they've been done years and years ago, have become super popular and
Right.
hashtag worthy.
And
now.
I think it's great that they're becoming popular, because I think the more that we do to challenge ourselves and stress the body so that it strengthens in response, it's excellent for us. But again, 3 minutes minimum, 6 minutes maximum, 48 degrees to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you will do just fine in a cold plunge every day in the morning before your exercise, even before your coffee.
I love that.
Don't negotiate with yourself. Get up in the morning, brush your teeth, wash your face, walk to the edge of the cold plunge, take 4 deep breaths, and get in.
Is it a good, just if for someone who just wants weight loss, can it help just improve your metabolism enough to increase it?
Anything that heats the body up,
or cools it down, I should say. Yeah.
Well, this is going to cool it down. It's the return to body temperature that's where you really burn the fat. And thermogenesis, which comes mainly from something called brown fat, if it increases your metabolic rate and you maintain the same calories, you're going to lose weight. In my opinion, there's nothing that will strip weight off your body faster than getting in cold water. A calorie is a measure of heat.
Yeah.
Right? It's the amount of heat that it takes to raise 1 cubic centimeter of water, 1 degree centigrade, measured in joules. And so if a calorie is a measure of heat, then when heat is leaving your body, what do you think is leaving your body?
Right.
The equivalent of calories. So, I don't believe there's anything that will strip fat off your body faster than getting in cold water.
Wow. What about, so if you have to pick a sauna or a cold plunge in terms of overall health, well, which one would you, if you had to pick one, which one would it be?
No question, a cold plunge.
Really?
Absolutely no question. Hands down, you can do it every single day, 3 to 6 minutes. A cold plunge, in my opinion, will do more for your mood, your emotional state, your endorphin levels, your fatty acid metabolism, oxygenating the brain and the core. And in my opinion, it's significantly less risky than high heat environments.
Wow. Okay. So how about to the people who like to go in the sauna for 10 minutes and then work out versus what you said about the cold plunge? Now, because I would think that, you're getting your body warmed up, it's helping you to obviously sweat and Is that just like kind of like just old school thinking or a myth?
Yeah, that's old school thinking.
Yeah.
So if we get cold before we exercise, now don't get out of a cold plunge and go straight into lifting heavy weights. Allow your body to warm back up. It's actually better to warm up before exercise than it is to stretch. Actually, a lot of good physiotherapists will tell you don't stretch before exercise, right? Just warm the muscles up. So what we don't want to do is get in cold water immediately after intense exercise and shut down the repair process. So in my opinion, if you were hypothermic before you exercised and hyperthermic after exercise, you have the best of both worlds. The ideal situation would be cold plunge, warm up, exercise, and then either get into a sauna or get into a red light therapy bed. Even better.
Even better.
No question.
Someone was telling me, a really well-known one, that if you want to keep muscle mass or build muscle mass, don't do the cold plunge.
Don't do the cold plunge after exercise.
Yeah.
I don't believe that there's any physiologic downside to cold water immersion prior to intense exercise.
So is that like a myth in your opinion? Or it's not really, there's no research to back that?
I'm not aware of any research that would say cold plunging in the mornings after having an intense exercise the previous day would have any negative physiologic effect. In fact, most of the superhuman athletes that I work with, and they're very well-known athletes, they get into cold water in the mornings and they get hyperthermic, or they use red light therapy after exercise.
Yeah.
And
to build muscle though? Or
to build muscle and recover from.
The recovery for sure.
Yeah.
This one was telling me, the one I'm talking about, that he was told that, or he's being trained to now, because he's trying to build mass, not to do the cold plunge.
I would say not to do the cold plunge after a mass building exercise, but I'm not unaware of any negative impact on muscle hypertrophy or muscle hyperplasia, given its distance from when you exercise.
So maybe it is after he works out. It could be that.
It's probably immediately after
It probably is
workout.
immediately after the workout.
There's a lot of negative evidence to say that cold plunging immediately after a workout is not
what you're saying.
It's not going to help you repair.
Okay, so now let's get back to all the other stuff, because these are all I can go on a million tangents. You're so knowledgeable. Is it true that you have a photographic memory? And you can memorize everything?
Yep. Well, just what I read. So I can remember voluminous amounts of information that I read. So, when I was it really happened around the 8th grade. They thought that I was either savant or autistic or something was wrong. But they found out that I was just clinically photographic. So, I'm very cautious about what I read. So I only read peer-reviewed journals. I only read science. I don't read for pleasure. I can't really read for pleasure.
Because you'll remember everything?
Yeah, I don't look at menus in a restaurant. I can't read the Seatback magazine on an airplane or...
You can't look at a menu?
No, or I'll tell you, the entire breakfast menu for a nominal restaurant that maybe I just stopped in to eat once. So
once it's in your brain, you can't get it out.
Yeah, so I don't have really a choice over what I record. I just, I record voluminous amounts of information. I used to get accused a lot in school of cheating because I would take my test and flip it over. I would write formulas on the back of my test. And, my physics professor would say, you can't bring formulas into the class. I would say I didn't bring them into the class. I wrote them on the back of the test so I could refer to them during the test.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah. And he would say, if that's a fact, could you turn your paper over right now and rewrite all those formulas right here in my office in front of me? I got a 0 on a physics exam one time for that. And when he called me in my office, he made me do exactly that. He said, so I guess you could rewrite all of those formulas right here in front of me. And I said, sure, give me a pen. And I sat there with a pen and I rewrote all the formulas from my previous physics test and gave it to him. And he was like, wow, okay, got a 98.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So when I was in grad school at National University of Health Sciences, I was the only one that the dean approved to tutor the class while I was taking it. So I was taking gross anatomy. We had 9 hours of cadaver anatomy a week. And now I think back, I'm like, gosh, I breathed formaldehyde for 9 hours. For 9 hours.
Yeah.
So being the biohacker I am now, I probably would have taken huge issue with that because it was just a giant room full of cadavers. But
wow.
But I would take the class for 3 hours and then I would tutor it after the class.
So wait a second. So is photographic and photogenic the different?
They're similar. I mean, photographic memory is just an extraordinarily ability to recall information that you have viewed, information that you've seen.
Right.
And so my auditory memory is terrible. My wife will tell you that.
Really? You're a guy. I'm not surprised at all.
We're going to such and such a place for dinner tonight. I'm like, great, babe. What time? 7:00. And it's like 7:45. She's like, where the hell are you? I'm like, what do you mean? I'm at the gym. She's
my God.
I told you we were going to dinner. I'm like, oh yeah. So she writes things down if she wants me to.
Oh my God! Is it that? That has to be like just like a male thing. No matter how photogenic, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
really, it's like unbelievable.
But if I read it, then I'll never forget it.
So if you read it, you'll always remember it.
So a lot of times, people are like, "You're so smart," but I'm not actually that smart. I'm just recalling generally other people's information that I've either read or studied.
So there's no, you don't have like a cap, you're not, no matter what you read, no matter what, you will always remember it. Or does it fade after time?
I mean, it barely fades, especially if it's a topic that I'm interested in. I have just a voluminous capacity to recall. I was in a contract negotiation recently with my current company, and I recalled every provision of every version of every contract since the day they acquired the company. So I didn't have to actually have the contract in front of me. I was able to have a realistic call with all of the attorneys on the phone while I'm driving because When we first started the company, I used to commute from Naples to Miami. It was a 2.5 hour drive. And so during that drive, I would lay all of these lab results and gene test results for multiple patients out on the table. And then I would just record all that information. And then I would get in the car and I would talk to the patients for 2.5 hours going across the alley, and I would walk them through their labs. And there were hundreds of lab values on there. And I would just go through them. Sequence.
It's amazing. So, you're photographic, you said? Photographic. Okay, so let's get back to we went on a real long tangent about the cold plunge and the sauna, but we were at the place where you were telling us about actually vitamin D.
Yeah.
And when you were at a life insurance company. And I guess I would love to know the origin of your life, right? Because here you are. I know you're a human biologist. You're obviously a biohacker. You've done extraordinary, your whole idea and your whole concept, if I'm not mistaken, is your body, you're basically, if someone is deficient in a mineral that their body has, and they can replenish that particular raw material of whatever that is, you can, for lack of a better word, become like superhuman or really exponentially increase your health by 10 or 100.
No doubt. I mean, most of the people listening to this podcast right now are probably walking around at about 60 to 65% of their true state of normal. They've forgotten how good normal really feels. And, most of us accept so many things as a consequence of aging, weight gain, water retention, brain fog, I can't sleep, I have anxiousness, I have some anxiety, I've got hormone imbalance, I don't have the same waking energy I had a few years ago, my short-term memory doesn't seem to be as good, and we chalk it up to a consequence of aging or stress or our environment or our careers, and it's actually none of those things. It is a consequence of missing raw material. And what I mean is, when you deprive the human body of certain raw materials, certain vitamins, minerals, amino acids, you get the expression of disease. So in other words, rarely does disease run in families. Rarely do we actually have genetically inherited disease. There are some exceptions. There are some genes that pass disease from generation to generation. But the majority of the time, what we pass from generation to generation, if you have hypothyroid and your father had hypothyroid and your grandmother on your mother's side had hypothyroid, a physician is likely going to tell you you have genetically inherited hypothyroid or genetically inherited hypertension or hypercholesterolemia or hypertriglyceridemia. And very often it's not the genetically inherited disease. It is a genetically inherited inability for the body to take a raw material that enters the body, a vitamin, a mineral, an amino acid, a nutrient, and convert it into the usable form. This process in human beings is called methylation. It is the most important process that our bodies go through every day. You do it 300 billion times a day.
What is it?
It's the process of taking a raw material like folic acid comes into our diet. Folic acid's useless in the human body. And you can't use folic acid in any physiologic transaction. The body takes folic acid and it converts it through a series of steps into something called methylfolate. Now the body can use that mineral. It's just like we pull crude oil out of the ground, but you can't put crude oil into your gas tank. The car doesn't understand that fuel source. Crude oil has to be refined into gasoline, and now the car can run. Well, if you couldn't refine that crude oil, that vehicle would never run. Human beings are no different. If you don't know what your body can process and what it can't, then you don't know what deficiency you have. It is this deficiency that leads to some of the most common ailments that we face as mankind. We define, for example, depression. One of the ways we define depression in this country is an inadequate supply of serotonin. So if you're low on serotonin, you're by definition depressed. So you would think that the fix would be to raise serotonin. But that's not what we do. We take people that are low on serotonin and we put them on something called SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So what these do effectively is they ration what little serotonin you have. They reduce the uptake of serotonin, so they ration it. So by definition, they never raise serotonin. So by definition, they never end depression. That's why I see people all the time and I say, well, how long have you been on antidepressants? And they say 12, 15 years. And I go, well, when did you think it was going to kick in? But if we understand that serotonin is made in the gut, 90% of the serotonin in the body is in the gut.
Okay.
If you don't have it here, you can't have it here. Depression rarely begins in an outside environment. That may be what triggers it. But it is exacerbated because of low serotonin. This is why most people that are depressed also have gut issues, because serotonin is also responsible for gut motility. It is very easy, in many cases, to turn the serotonin factory back on. So how do we create serotonin? We take an amino acid called tryptophan, and the body methylates it in serotonin. So if you're deficient in certain B vitamins, methylfolates, certain amino acids, you can't make this conversion. So now you have low serotonin, so you're depressed. But you're not depressed because you have true depression. You're depressed because your body is deficient in amino acids, B vitamins, and certain light metals, magnesium and zinc, that are required to make this conversion. And just by putting those back into the human body, very often you can raise the level of serotonin and depression can eviscerate. And this is true with anxiety. I mean, most people that have anxiety have the same characteristics. You can prove that it's not coming from their outside environment. I mean, if you ask somebody that's suffering from anxiety 3 questions, if you say, have you had it on and off throughout your lifetime? Most of the time they'll say yes.
Okay, yeah.
Here's your first sign that's coming from a gene mutation. And you ask them, can you point to the specific trigger that causes it? And very often they'll say no. I don't have to be afraid of heights and walk to the edge of a 30th floor balcony. I don't have to be claustrophobic and get on a crowded elevator. I can just feel anxiety sitting here in a podcast with you right now. So that's your second sign.
I'm very intimidating, that's why.
Well, so that's your second sign that it's coming from your physiology. And then if you ask them, have you ever tried anti-anxiety medications? They'll say, they don't work. They just make me feel like a zombie. Now, you take that person, test them for these 5 genes that I'm a big fan of, one of which is called MTHFR. And you find they have this gene mutation. They have a deficiency in methylfolate. So now their body doesn't have the raw material it needs to make serotonin. It doesn't have the raw material that it needs to degrade catecholamines, fight or flight neurotransmitters. And so when you put this raw material back into the human body, something as simple as methylfolate, SAMe, magnesiums, zincs, the complex of B vitamins.
What's SAMe?
S-adenosylmethionine. For people that have a difficult time sleeping, very often they're low in a nutrient called SAMe that the brain uses to quiet the mind, right? And so a lot of people will lay down to go to sleep at night, and their body tired, but as soon as they try to go to sleep, their mind is awake. Right? And their mind starts to replay the day. And if you ask them,
that's me.
What kind of things are you thinking about? They'll say, I'm thinking about the most innocuous little things. Like, did I get everything on my grocery list? Did my belt match my shoes? Did I return that email? Nothing that couldn't wait till the next day. This is excess catecholamines in the brain. This is a category of neurotransmitters similar to fight or flight. And when they rise in the brain at night, we can't degrade them as quickly. So it keeps us awake. So simple vitamins, methylated vitamins and minerals and amino acids can very often fix that. I mean, people that get a gene test and they find where their gene breaks are and they supplement for deficiency, not for the sake of supplementing. When I go to most people's supplement cabinets, I see it's like a myriad of nonsense. It depends on what they read last week, right? So it's like NMN, nicotinamide riboside, nicotinic acid, metformin. Because I read this on this guy's website. I read this on this guy's website.
Right, 100%. 100%. So your whole take, and that makes sense, is that you should be supplementing for where you're deficient, not just supplementing for the sake of supplementing.
You want to see magic happen in the human body?
Yeah.
Start supplementing for deficiency, for your deficiencies. And you can, it's called a methylation test. I'm not the only one that does this test. There are hundreds of great companies that do it. You test your methylated genes, the methylation. And there's 5 main ones that I like to look at. And this will tell you what raw materials your body can convert into the usable form and what it can. Watch what happens to your body when you give it the raw material it needs to do its job. Just imagine if you were clinically deficient in vitamin D3 and you took vitamin D3. Yeah. What if you realize that you can't process folic acid? You have to take methylfolate. Or you realize that the folic acid in your diet is actually the cause of your anxiety and your ADD and your ADHD.
How would you know, though? Like, how do you know?
Well,
you take this test. By the way, I've been taking vitamin D for years.
Great.
But I feel like everyone now is like over vitamin. Like everyone's taking so much vitamin D.
Well, I mean, the majority of the population is clinically deficient in vitamin D3. I mean, between 60 and 80 nanograms per deciliter. If you go on most blood tests, I mean, the low end is 30, the high end is 100. Between 60 and 80 nanograms is the perfect, optimal sweet spot for vitamin D3. I mean, the second leading cause of morbidity in COVID was clinical deficiency in D3.
Can I tell you something interesting though? Like another side note, really. Someone was telling me this years ago, and they were like laughed out of town when they were saying if people took more vitamin D, they wouldn't have COVID. They would reduce their chances of COVID, and they were like shunned and became ostracized.
I got lambasted during COVID because I was telling people to fast. I was telling people to take vitamin D3, magnesium, zinc, and even some of the antivirals that are now they're realizing that the antivirals, ivermectin, and some of these other antivirals were the panacea.
Exactly.
Right? We have a pretty large clinic now. We have a lot of physicians that work for us, and a very large part of the patients we treat are long COVID and vaccine injury.
Isn't that
Sadly.
insane? Mm-hmm. Do you think there's even a correlation between, I've noticed just in people I know maybe not in my close friend circle, but definitely people that I or like around my periphery who are very young, like in their 40s, who are very fit, active people, doctors, a few doctors who are like dropping dead of heart attacks, literally like 5 of them. Like, I mean, it's really, and they all, is it because, and people are wondering if it's because the only thing that they all, like, they are all, obviously, everyone took the, what do you call it? The vaccination and the boosting. Is that a correlation between the heart and?
Well, I mean, if you look at,
I should be careful what I say. I'm going to be like canceled.
We're going to get canceled. I always get uncomfortable talking about it.
I get uncomfortable too. Should I edit this part out? Because I swear if I even put this in a teaser, I'll be like shunned.
Yeah. Well,
you know?
I mean, the thing is, if you look at, a lot of the design of some of these vaccines, they're mRNA, messenger RNA.
Yeah.
And, if you look inside of a cell and you look at the nucleus of a cell, inside of there is the DNA.
Yeah.
That's the boss. Okay. That's the CEO. It's running the show. And it basically has 2 functions. It has a lot more, but it has 2 basic functions. One is replication. It makes a perfect copy of itself. But the other one is something called transcription, where it's actually giving commands into the cell. So like a CEO sitting at their desk, writing orders into the cell, telling all the minions what to do. Throw this protein out, bring this protein in, throw this waste product out, bring this through the ion channel. It's, make this protein, don't make that protein. It's basically writing orders, okay? Those orders are called messenger RNA. They leave the nucleus of the cell, they go out into the cell, and they give a command to the cell. One of them is make a protein. Only in a few hours, that command disintegrates. Okay, so that messenger RNA gives a command to the cell, it makes a protein, and then that message goes away.
Yeah.
With the mRNA vaccine, they made that message permanent. So now what happens is it's an imposter. It's stolen the CEO's notepad, and it is sending commands into the cell as if it were the CEO. So the cell responds. One of the commands is make a spike protein, a type of protein.
Yeah.
Only as soon as the cell makes the spike protein and that minion gets back to their desk, the same command is on the desk. So it makes the spike protein again. And then when it's done making the spike protein, it goes back to its desk and it makes the spike protein again. And it makes it again and again and again and again. And so this is why we don't know whether or not that's going to be shut off or not. Because right now, a lot of these mRNA vaccines are permanent messages to the cell to create a spike protein. So this rise in spike protein then causes these proteins to embed themselves in the arterial wall. You get something called diffuse vasculitis or dystonia vasculitis, which is inflammation in the lining of the artery. And you can also, when you get these proteins, you get abnormal platelet clotting, something called thrombolytic thrombocytopenia. And we like to think that the skin is the largest organ in the body, but the truth is that the surface area of the skin, the inside of your blood vessels, is about 6 times the surface area of your skin. You have 63,000 miles of blood vessel in your body. So just imagine if you had inflammation in the lining of that blood vessel. And I was talking to a cardiologist about this the other day. He's like, well, if we have this diffuse inflammation throughout the body, why don't I see it on imaging? I go, well, why don't you see a sunburn on imaging? I don't think you would argue if I had a 3rd-degree sunburn that there's damage to my skin.
Yeah.
But if you did an image of the skin, it would look normal, right? I mean, if you did typical imaging. So that's why if it's, you have this inflammation. So now nutrients can't leave the blood and enter the tissue. Waste can't leave the tissue and enter the bloodstream. And this is why the whole focus for these types of conditions is blood flow, reducing inflammation, repairing the arterial wall.
It's crazy. I mean, I'm even scared to delve into it, right? Because
I know
so controversial.
I get banned all the time on social media.
For sure.
And look, that's not my opinion. I'm not an anti-vaxxer.
But even if anyone has God forbid people have like their own opinion, people get so like enraged about it. And I don't understand. I have my social media account
completely deleted for it. Yeah, completely deleted.
Because you said this?
Because
I'm not making a teaser then. Just kidding. No, but completely because you said this particular part.
Well, because, I was really telling people, during COVID, before the vaccines were out and as they were emerging, I was saying, like, don't sit around on your couch and just wait to stop breathing, right? First of all, sunlight, grounding, breath work,
all those
vitamin
things.
D3, zinc, magnesium, vitamin C. Just please start taking these things because...
But even if they're not deficient? What if they are not deficient in magnesium or zinc?
It's hard to overdo it with normopathic doses of those types of
Okay,
light
so
models.
those are kind of benign.
They're super benign.
Okay.
And a lot of the water-soluble vitamins that just spill over into the urine, they don't have toxicity doses that you get in those levels.
Okay.
And so the downside risk is significantly less than the upside risk.
Okay.
Very, very rare that someone that's not supplementing with magnesium is high in magnesium, or somebody that's not getting a ton of sunlight is too high in vitamin D3.
Right.
And so these are, basic things that can bolster your immune system. They can, improve the body's, response to pathogens. Because at one point, getting on a ventilator was the kiss of death. You had a higher chance of dying from ventilation than you did from the COVID vaccine. I mean, the COVID infection. But the real challenge is that, we try to outsmart Mother Nature. I mean, I just personally believe more in what God gave me to defend myself than an unproven.
But why is that a bad
vaccine.
thing? That's what I keep
Well,
on
we know
coming
now
back to
that there's clear definitive evidence.
That's what I'm saying.
A natural infection, a natural immune response gives a longer duration of immunity and a broader, level of immunity.
Okay, so let's get off the Cobra thing because now I'm nervous also. And then I want to get back to that method test then. So methylation test.
That's one test every human being should do once in their lifetime. You get so much information from that. It's
where
amazing.
do can I go and call you and be like, hey, can I have this? How much is this test, first of all?
It's $599. It's about $600. You do it once in your lifetime.
That's it? You do it once in your life?
You do it once in your lifetime. You take a Q-tip, you rub the inside of your cheek, you put it in a test tube, you send it to the lab, the results come back, it will tell you exactly what your body can break down and what it can't. And then you can supplement for that deficiency.
How accurate is that thing, though?
Absolutely accurate. It's a PCR test. It's a polymerase chain reaction test. It uses your DNA to give you your results. It's a very easy test for a laboratory to perform.
Okay.
And these methylated genes are responsible for these conversions, like the folic acid and the other derivatives of folate into the form that the body can use. So, for example, 44% of the population roughly has the genetic mutation MTHFR. And if you want to have some fun, just Google MTHFR. Make sure you capitalize it, or you'll find yourself on some really colorful websites. Because I won't tell you what the nickname is for that gene, right? I'm sure you can figure it out.
Totally.
It's called the motherfucker gene. So if you don't capitalize it, you'll be down the wrong rabbit hole. But capitalize MTHFR.
But Gary Brecka told me to do this.
He's a sicko. But you put that into the Google search engine, put the word and put any condition you're having.
Did you just say into the Google search engine?
Yeah, put it into Google.
That's what everyone puts
the Google search
the
engine.
Google, the Wi-Fi.
Put it into the Google, put it into the Yahoo,
Yeah.
put it into wherever the heck you want,
AOL.
but just search it.
Yes.
AOL is really dating yourself.
Really
That's
old. I'm really aging you. Yes, exactly.
But and just put and anxiety and depression and gut health, and you're going to be astounded at the peer-reviewed, published clinical studies, human trials that have been done or surrounding supplementation for this gene mutation, and the capacity of the human body to recover from some of the most chronic conditions you could imagine. A lot of people that have, real severe gut issues, gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, cramping, Crohn's, irritable bowel syndrome, diverticulitis, all of these conditions of inflammation are that we think come from an autoimmune condition, or they come from food allergies. In many cases are related to the gut motility. The motility, the pace of the gut, is more important than its contents.
What do you mean?
So, you can think of the human intestinal tract as a 30-foot long conveyor belt, right?
Okay.
Just like a conveyor belt in a factory, right? So you put contents on it at one end, and as this, let's say, auto part traverses this conveyor belt, every few feet somebody tinkers with the part so that by the time it reaches the end of the conveyor belt, it's fully assembled. This is very much how the human intestinal tract works. It's a 30-foot long conveyor belt. You put parts on it at one end. When they exit the stomach, they're very acidic. By the time they exit the rectum, they're very basic. And instead of people standing along this conveyor belt working on a part, these are bacteria. The sequence of this activity is very important. So if I'm supposed to pass something to you and you're supposed to pass it to the next person and the next person, I can't skip 5 of you and hand it to somebody further down the line, right? So the sequence of events is extraordinarily important. So remember Henry Ford was actually made famous for the assembly line, not for the automobile, right? His big claim to fame was the assembly line. So imagine if he walked into his factory one day and doubled the speed of the conveyor belt. The entire assembly line would break down. There's nothing wrong with the conveyor belt. There's nothing wrong with the people working there. There's nothing wrong with the part that's on there. So there's nothing wrong with the human being. There's nothing wrong with the intestinal tract. There's nothing wrong with what you put in it. The challenge is the speed. If I accelerate acidic contents into a basic media, function perverts. Gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, cramping. People that are listening to this that are starting to identify with it, these are people that have chased allergies for their lifetime. They're like, I'm allergic to wheat, soy, gluten, dairy, soybean, corn oil. I'm like, slow down. Right?
Yeah.
First of all, there's a certain series of allergies you can't have, or you'd be allergic to all the essential amino acids. You'd be dead. So the reason why you think you have all these allergies is because each time you have a gut issue, you correlate it to what you last ate. So you go, well, wait a second. I ate the same thing on Monday morning and I was fine. I ate the exact same thing on Wednesday afternoon and I blew up like a tick. Well, how can I eat the same thing and have 2 totally different reactions? Because it's not related to what you're eating. It's related to the pace of the gut, the speed of the gut. People that have anxiety generally always suffer from gut issues because the serotonin depletion also affects the gut motility. And this is why gene testing is so important, because if I can fix the serotonin deficiency, I can fix the gut and the mood and the anxiety and the emotional state. Right? So when you deprive the body of certain raw materials, you get the expression of disease. It's the same thing in very often in thyroid. When
like it imitates disease.
It imitates disease. Like, for example, some people have a very difficult time. They have a gene mutation that doesn't allow them to metabolize an amino acid in their blood called homocysteine. Okay, homocysteine is found in everybody's bloodstream. It's a normal amino acid. But when it rises, it becomes one of the most inflammatory compounds in the human body. If you haven't been tested for homocysteine, you should do a blood test for that. And so let's say that you come from a long line of people that have inherited hypertension. My father had hypertension, my grandfather had hypertension, my grandmother on my mom's side had hypertension. I'm making this up, but
yeah, I know. I'm just writing.
When you talk to your physician, they're going to say you have something called idiopathic hypertension, hypertension of an unknown origin. It's probably genetically inherited.
Okay.
Well, my first question would be, what gene did I inherit that gave me hypertension? Because their face will go blank. They won't be able to tell you what gene in most cases. But what you inherit is an inability to metabolize homocysteine. As this compound rises in the bloodstream and it's cruising by the arterial wall, it irritates the artery, and the artery clamps down. If you make the pipes smaller in a fixed system, pressure goes up. Right. And so you go to the doctor and your EKG is normal, your stress EKG is normal, your cardiac cath is normal, your dye contrast study is normal, your stress EKG, your heart and lung sounds are all normal. But they still put you on blood pressure medication because they can't figure out the source.
Right.
Well, this is, in some cases, this is because your arteries have narrowed, driving the pressure up. It's very easy to bring homocysteine down. If you know that you have this inability to convert homocysteine, you can supplement for it and drop your homocysteine, relax the arterial wall, and very often return your blood pressure to normal.
So what if people can't, what I found, this is interesting, some people aren't able to even digest properly. They're not digesting their supplements or their food. They're
gut motility issues.
Is that also
because what happens is, so if I speed the gut up too fast, I take acidic contents, I accelerate it to a basic media. First you do the gene test, and once you find out what you're deficient in, you supplement for that deficiency. Restore the normal peristaltic activity to the gut. And very often when you restore the normal peristaltic activity, the pace of the gut, you'll also restore the proper strength to the sphincter muscles that protect the stomach. So as food goes down the esophagus, it goes through something called the cardiac sphincter, goes through a muscle that opens, lets the food in, and then it closes. And then another one at the bottom of the stomach called the pyloric sphincter opens and lets the contents out into the intestine. So normally these things work in opposition to one another. When they get weak and they relax, acid splashes out of the stomach into the esophagus. We think this is an excess production of acid. It's not. So we start taking antacids or proton pump inhibitors. That is a disaster for your intestinal tract because now you are dumping alkaline contents into an acidic media, into bacteria that are meant to receive acidic contents. So now you've screwed up the entire intestinal tract, right?
Wow.
So when you supplement with, depending on your gene deficiency, magnesium, zincs, the complex of B vitamins, certain amino acids, you can very often restore that sphincter strength, and gastroesophageal reflux disease goes away because it's not really a gastric disease that you had; it was a weak sphincter. The same thing with the hypertension. It wasn't really high blood pressure. It was constricted arteries. Same thing happens in the thyroid.
In the thyroid. So wait, so I mean, okay, so you leave this. You leave the insurance company after 22 years, and then what did you say to yourself? Origins. Let's get. Because I want to show like how I want to kind of explain to people who are listening how you became this guy, right? Because you were working at the insurance company.
So
you have all this information. Obviously, you got a photogenic memory. You are like, you remember every factoid about the human body that's possible. Did you quit and say, I'm going to start seeing people and helping them get healthy? Like, what was your step? What was the process?
It was kind of a very specific case, actually. So for decades, I was working in this industry, and you kind of brainwash yourself to think that it's just data.
Okay, right.
Because you're not allowed to have any contact with the patient.
But what did you do actually there? Were you like the one saying, okay, this person's going to live until January 1966. This one's going to live until...
January 1966. that would be going back in time, by the way.
I'm just making up shit. Like 2047. I'm just making it up.
Yeah, so among other things, I did life expectancy predictions. And there are some major companies that do life expectancy predictions. American Biological Services, Fasano. If you Google these companies, they're extraordinarily accurate and good at what they do. But I would do a medical record extraction. So I would take the medical records. I would read all of the patient history, all of the meds that they were on. I would put all of those things into a table. I would look at all of their conditions. And then we would look at models of if someone has this level of atherosclerotic disease or this body mass index, or they have this gene mutation and they're not being treated for it, or they have anemia that's not being treated, or any number of other conditions, vitamin D3. As we put these things into a model, it would actually extrapolate out the impact on their life expectancy.
But that was your job. That was actually the job you did.
That was actually the job that I did. Yes, that was actually the job that I did.
What's
So
it called?
I read medical records for
a living.
Probabilistic mortality model. That's what I did. I built probabilistic mortality models.
Do you remember every single person that you read about because of that memory of yours?
I remember a lot of them. I'll tell you, there was a very, very, very strange incident that happened to me and my wife. She'll remember this. I was never allowed to have any contact with the treating physician or the patient. And I was working on a case. And it was a very, very large life insurance policy. And it was a really important case. And we had gotten all their records and all their blood work and all of their testing and all of their personal information. And I'd combed through that, and I'd completed this probabilistic model. And then by some crazy stroke of serendipity, we went to dinner with another couple, and this gentleman was at dinner with us. So I sat down next to him. I had never met him before, but I knew every medication he was on. I knew his cardiovascular risk score. I knew his blood pressure readings. I knew how much metformin he was taking. I knew everything. I even knew that he was treating his children differently in his trust and estate, the way that his will was structured.
Get out.
It was very freaky.
When was it? How many years ago are we talking?
How many years ago was that?
Almost
10. So it was about 10 years ago. It was right before I left the industry.
Wow.
We showed up at dinner.
That's
and he said,
wild.
we're bringing a couple, and he gave me their names, but I didn't correlate the name to the case. And then when we sat down, I was like, oh my God, you're
so-and-so.
So nice to meet you, and I so desperately wanted to pull him aside. It was a very emotional time, probably going to get emotional talking about it, but I desperately wanted to pull him aside and say, you have these modifiable risk factors. You need to change these 5 things in your life, or you are accelerating your pace towards the grave. And it was a very emotional dinner for us. And when we left, I think I cried that night, and I just felt so helpless. And that and another case that we had where I began to realize that there were human beings on the other side of these spreadsheets. It wasn't just data. And so, there I was. I wasn't able to really do anything to help these people. And I just said, how much more time am I going to spend predicting how long people are going to live until I start helping people live healthier, happier, longer lives? And so I resigned from that industry, and I came home and I told her I wanted to start a wellness company. I'm getting emotional.
Oh my God. Is that really how it happened?
Yeah. So I came home and I told her, I said, I quit my job today, babe, and I want to start a wellness company. I said, I'm not going into that office one more day. I'm looking at another spreadsheet predicting on how soon somebody's going to die. I really want to help people live healthier, happier, longer lives, and I have the capacity to do it. I'm not licensed to practice medicine, but we need to find a physician, and we need to open a clinic, and I need to start looking at this blood work and these gene tests and start communicating with people how we can help them live longer. And she was all for it. And so we started a company called Streamline Medical Group and I don't know if we've ever even told this story, it was a former vitamin shop in a little strip mall in Naples, Florida, right next to the busiest LA Fitness in the country. And it was just her and I and a doctor in town, an anesthesiologist in town. And we started doing blood work and gene testing, and it just started to grow and mushroom and balloon. And then I started training other physicians, and I started, sharing my knowledge that I'd learned in the insurance industry. And a lot of the doctors initially, there was a lot of friction, but then when they saw the changes in people over 10 or 12 weeks, what we could do with their blood work and with their gene tests, they were astounded. I mean, now we have 120 employees, and we've got offices all over the country, and it's just exploding. And I'm so blessed because I feel like I found God's purpose for me. Like I know, because I found something that I would do for free and somehow monetized it.
I can see that and you genuinely have passion for this. Like you probably, because you're going around the country, whatever you're going, or around the world talking about this stuff. And I can see that you're not bored by saying the same thing over and over again.
I'm super excited about it. I never run out of energy for this, because I feel like I have such a hole to fill, because I wasted 22 years of my life enriching an insurance company, helping them predict how soon, their insureds were going to die. And had I just been able to pick up the phone,
wow,
I could have added, on average, 7 years to the lives of those people that I did life expectancies on. And I know, because in the tail end of my career, I started manipulating the model. What if I fixed the D3? What if I deleted the anemia? What if I fixed the congestive heart failure? What if I went back and fixed the misdiagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis? What if this person knew that they actually didn't have hypothyroid? They just had a methylation issue in their gut, and they could take these supplements and they could get off thyroid medication. I've read so many medical records, because for 20 years, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, all I did was read medical records. That's it. So I looked at the outcomes for orthopedic surgeries and the outcomes for, prosthetic, knee, hip, shoulder replacements, ankle replacements. I looked at how medications would impact other causes of mortality, like statins impacting all-cause mortality and depleting hormone levels and reducing the ability for cells to communicate and exchange with their outside environment, making people sicker. I looked at the real research, because we had to make decisions based on valid research. Like we couldn't just put something into the model because we thought it was cool. We would actually look at real peer-reviewed research and extrapolate that with mortality data and come up with a real number. And it's astounding to me the paucity of understanding of the human physiology in the medical community. We study chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals, but we barely study human beings. We've lost so much faith in humanity and mankind and the ability of this to heal this. We're starting now to really understand the power of frequency and mood and emotion on healing ourselves. We're also starting to understand the importance of basic nutrients in the human body to strengthen itself. Sunlight, vitamin D3, grounding, whole foods. People argue about keto or paleo or vegan or vegetarian. None of that is really as important as the quality of the food source that you're eating. It's not a carnivore diet or a keto diet or a paleo diet or a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet. It's the caliber of the food source. It's the distance from the soil to the table. I was censored a few months ago for talking about the massive negative impact of seed oils. It's not necessarily the seed oil itself that's harmful. It's the industrial processing of seed oils that's harmful. We know now that no amount of fluoride in our water is safe. We have to be filtering fluoride and chlorine out of our water at a minimum. No amount of seed oils are safe. We blame cholesterol for crimes it doesn't commit because polyunsaturated fatty acids cause oxidation in cholesterol that causes it to be caustic. Cholesterol's basically harmless. You don't even absorb cholesterol from your diet.
Right.
Through your intestine.
So obviously you eat a lot of eggs.
I eat a ton of eggs.
Yeah, me too.
I eat grass-fed meat. I eat eggs. I eat pasture-raised chickens. I eat pasture-raised free-range eggs. I eat all the things you're not supposed to eat. I
Do you
consume
like fruit?
some.
Are you into fruit?
I eat fruits that end in berry. So blueberry, blackberry, raspberry, strawberry, mainly. I don't blend fruits because you'll quadruple the glycemic profile. The difference between a banana that you eat and a banana you put in the blender is night and day.
What?
4 times the rate of blood sugar increase.
By putting a banana in a blender?
Putting any fruit in a blender.
Why?
Because you first of all, you disperse the fiber that's in the fruit. So if you take a banana and you puree it, and then you mix it with milk or nut milk or something like that, you're basically quadrupling its impact on blood sugar, the glycemic index, which is the rate at which blood sugar rises. And the truth is, blood sugar is the root of all evil. Yeah. It really is. The Bible should say blood sugar is the root of all evil, not the love of money. That's a joke.
I know. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's a joke.
We're getting canceled for 5 other things already.
Dude, we've talked about religion, the vaccine. All we got to do is hit politics.
This won't even be
and then
on
we'll be
anymore.
done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This will be like, what podcast?
And then we'll both
exactly.
be dead. But,
you'll have to hire me for a job.
We know Alzheimer's, for example. When I was in the insurance industry, and we would see early onset Alzheimer's patients, not once in 22 years did I see an early onset Alzheimer's or demented patient for that matter that did not have 10 years of elevated blood sugar prior to. And now there's a lot of clinical studies. You can get them at the National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health, and PubMed, and other big, places where you can search journal articles. We're calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, insulin resistance in the brain. The big lie about Alzheimer's is that people are losing their memory. That's actually not true. They're losing access to their memory. And access can be restored.
How?
Blood flow, hypoxia. If you look at the neural entanglement in Alzheimer's, we used to say, well, this is all related to amyloid plaques, but we've actually seen, brains where entanglements and these amyloid plaquing are significantly more progressive than patients that have Alzheimer's, and they have no exacerbation of the disease. It has to do with blood flow. It has to do with the way the brain communicates with other hemispheres of the brain. When people have a lot of these neuropathic conditions like Alzheimer's, they'll have periods where they do something called sputter. Right? If you've ever had the misfortune of having a loved one that has Alzheimer's, they'll all of a sudden have this recall of an incident with such a level of clarity. You're like, wait a second, that was my 5th birthday. You remember the birthday cake, the color of the balloons, who was there?
Totally.
You recognized me. So that proves that the memory is not gone. The access to the memory is gone. When we start to reduce blood flow in the body, this is why I say the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. We get the expression of disease that is not that disease. So, for example, if I put a tourniquet around your calf and I restricted the blood flow to your foot, pretty soon you would have to have some serious neurological signs. You'd have tingling, numbness, eventually pain. It would go completely numb. You'd have burning, itching. You'd have all of these neurological sensations. And I would say you have peripheral neuropathy. Well, you don't have peripheral neuropathy. You have a decrease in blood flow that's causing you to have peripheral neuropathy symptoms. This happens in thyroid. Very few physicians that I'm aware of even realize that the thyroid only makes, we diagnose people with hypothyroid because they're low on T3 very often. And
really?
But the thyroid only makes 20% of the T3 in our bloodstream. So when T3 is low and we call it hypothyroid, there's an 80% chance it's something else, because the other 80% of the thyroid hormone is methylated in the gut. We actually convert T4 into T3 in the gut. So if you don't know if you have a gene mutation that impairs that conversion, then you spend a whole lifetime on thyroid medication for a condition that you don't have. We hold organs in the human body responsible for crimes they don't commit all the time. This is why we have the definition called idiopathic, meaning of unknown origin. Because I say your thyroid is low, but there's nothing wrong with your thyroid, I'm still going to medicate the thyroid. Your blood pressure is high, but there's nothing wrong with your heart, I'm still going to medicate the heart. And we do this over and over again because we don't go down into the roots below the soil, and we say, what nutrients could be missing from this person's body that could be causing this condition to exist? Right before we got on this podcast, I told you, if you had something go wrong in that tree that's outside that window, and you called an arborist, a botanist over here, they wouldn't touch the leaves or the trunk. The first thing they would do is core test the soil. And they'd say, hey, that soil's deficient in nitrogen. Then they'd add nitrogen to the soil and the leaf would heal. But we don't think about human beings this way, right? We go straight to pathology, disease, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, synthetics. And the truth is that optimal health will never be found in a laboratory. It'll be found on Mother Earth by what God has surrounded us by. And the more we get back to the basics, whole food, sunlight, grounding, breath work, exercise, challenging the body, not seeking aggressive, comfort aggressively, the happier, healthier, and the longer we're going to live.
So then, what are you selling exactly? I
sell a gene test.
Okay, so what I was going to say, because everything you're saying, people don't have to be spending a lot of money.
Right. The only reason why I don't talk about what I sell on podcasts is because then I get attacked and they're like, everything has an angle. He's just trying to sell a blood test and just trying to sell a gene test. I hope you do get a blood test and a gene test. Most people know more about their businesses than they know about their bodies.
Yeah.
I meet with a lot of entrepreneurs, and they'll tell me their income statement, their balance sheet, their P&L, but they know nothing about their blood sugar. They don't know what vitamins they should be taking. They have no idea what's going on in their genes. And it's astounding to me that this is the temple that's going to take you 100%. Where you want to go, and we don't spend any time getting information on it.
So I think the problem I think is a little bit even different now. I think the problem is there's too much information, and people are now
I agree.
are confused. I think it's not a lack of information. I think it's an abundance of information.
I'll tell you what you need. You need to do a gene test, and you need to look at 5 major genes of methylation. Okay, this is a test you do once in your lifetime. You'll never repeat this test.
Yep.
Okay, it's called the genetic methylation test or genetic methylation profile. Once you have that information, you'll never guess again on what you need to supplement with. You'll be supplementing for deficiency, not the sake of supplementing.
And then then do you sell the supplements?
I also design my own supplements. It took me 2.5 years to design a supplement to fix these genetic breaks. So I make multivitamins that are specific to these gene breaks.
To gene breaks.
Yes.
So because I want to explain. So you were just basically, you started this company, wellness company, with your wife, or Sage. Hello, Sage.
Yeah.
And it was obviously like you're getting a lot of traction because people were seeing a lot of results, right? And then how long was it going on for? Like you left the...
Yeah, it was 5 years.
5 years. So 5 years you were kind of just trucking along, doing your thing, minding your own business.
We actually sold our primary residence to make payroll and build out this office and hire PAs and physicians, because again, I'm not licensed to practice medicine. And then I trained them on the blood testing. I believe there's 74 biomarkers we need to look at in the blood and 5 genetic markers we need to look at in the body. That's where you start. 74 biomarkers. You look at glycemic control, how well you're controlling your blood sugar, your hormone balance, and your nutrient deficiencies. You need to know those things. You have to know those things so that you can address them. They're very simple, easy things to address, but they're catastrophic if they go unchecked. Right?
This is amazing. Yeah.
And so I watched what happens when people have no idea what's going on with their blood sugar. They'd have no idea what nutrient deficiencies they have, and they don't know what's going on with their hormones. So those 3 things are a must. And then you get a genetic test that you do once in your lifetime, and you should do it on your kids as soon as they can chew and swallow. Because so goes puberty, so goes the adult. So if we can get kids in their prepubescent years, there's a much more significant chance that they don't have any of these ailments when they get older.
Really? So I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Oh, that's a great time to do it. They're both prepubescent. Yeah.
So then I would give them a genetic...
You do a cheek swab. You'll have a different child around the house. If your child has this MTHFR gene mutation, it is a full contact sport to get them in the car to go to school in the morning. If you're feeding them anything with folic acid, which, by the way, is an entirely man-made chemical. You can't find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth, even though in the United States we spray our entire grain supply, all pasta, all white flour, all white rice, all breads, all cereals of any kind, grains of any kind, we spray it with folic acid, a man-made chemical. And we call it fortified or enriched. When you feed 44% of the children fortified or enriched foods, they go nuts, right? So if you give them Pop-Tarts, white bagels, cereals, things like this in the mornings, but this is, the standard American diet. It's high in the food pyramid.
I know.
And you feed these kids this stuff before school. First of all, it's a full contact sport to get them in the car to go to school in the morning. And then as soon as they get to school, the call comes home from the teacher and they're like, little Johnny's not paying attention. He's disruptive. He doesn't follow directions. It's none of those things. Folic acid can be like cocaine for 6-year-olds. It makes their mind race. He's laughing off camera.
Yeah, that's.
He's like, I was doing cocaine when I was 6. But
Does it work for adults now?
It just makes their mind race. And then modern medicine says, well, if the mind is racing, then let's pump an amphetamine into the body to race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind, which is a terrible idea because eventually this causes something called tachyphylaxis, which is the medical term for desensitization. It burns these receptors out. It can actually permanently change the neuroplasticity of the brain. If you look at the study that actually just came out on antidepressants, the long-term use of antidepressants and the skyrocketing risk of suicide and the skyrocketing risk of prolonged and permanent depression, you would realize that we're going down the wrong route of mental illness and we should be talking about mental fitness. Exercise and clean whole foods and the supplementation for deficiency can change the trajectory of people's lives. Right?
Listen, you're preaching to the converted.
Sorry.
This is what I do. I mean, I could not agree with you more. And I mean, I feed my kids every day for breakfast eggs, because of that reason.
Whole eggs. Your body will absorb zero of that cholesterol. By
Whole eggs. I mean, and then, but I also, because I have to be, I don't want to be a total devil. I do give them a piece of whole wheat bread because they have to eat some kind of carbohydrate and fruit.
It's the 80-20 rule.
I'm trying,
try to
they're
give
like
them
8
fruits
and
that
10.
end in berry. Or try to have them eat the fruits.
But I give them a banana. I don't blend the fruit. I give them a banana.
Perfect.
But this blend, by the way, I'm listening to this podcast. I'm not joking. I've gotten I'm like literally have so many notes that I'm taking that I haven't even asked you the questions I have because.
Well, let's go through them.
I mean, I have so many and like, you're like giving me so much amazing information that I think I've never heard about putting a banana in a blender or whatever. Whenever you put a fruit in a blender, the glycemic load is 4 times higher.
No question.
But it makes sense because you are mixing it with the milk and this. People think they're doing themselves a big service by having these smoothies and shakes every morning.
Terrible.
But it's the worst possible
skyrocketing
option.
Your blood sugar. And it's the rate at which blood sugar rises that's very dangerous, right? I mean, because remember when glucose spikes in the blood, insulin spikes. So it's the rate of that spike. Right.
But they think, I'm putting collagen powder and protein powder in, so it must be good. Like that's the whole myth around it.
Again, it's the further we get away from the natural state of the food, right? So,
yes,
do you think that we used to pick bananas and berries and then we would put them in a blender and then drink them? No, we would actually eat them right off the tree, or we'd wash them and eat them.
So why not a peach? Because it's just too high in sugar.
Yeah, I mean, fruits that don't end in berry are very high on the glycemic index.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you can't eat them. I'm just saying if you are eating a lot of fruits, it's better to eat fruits that end in berry. Most people like strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries. I mean, there's plenty of fruits there that end in berry. And they're lower on the glycemic index.
How about a cherry? Sounds similar. Cherry, blackberry.
No, cherries are very high.
I love cherries. I know, super high in sugar.
Yeah.
But okay, what about stuff like for hormones, right? Are you a believer in hormone replacement like testosterone? Because that's also a rage. Everyone I feel over the age of 35 is now increasing, like they're all on testosterone.
But the truth is that 70% of the people that are on hormone therapy don't need hormone therapy. They need nutrients to supply their body with hormones. So for example...
Are you on it? Because you look good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do. I take testosterone. I'm 53 years old and I have something called primary hypogonadism. So initially I tried to put pressure on the testicles to stimulate the testicles to raise the level of testosterone.
Okay.
So for example, when you look at a blood test, just like every organ system in the body, just about every organ that secretes a hormone has a boss. So in the case of testosterone in a male, it's the pituitary. The pituitary is the boss of the testicle. The testicle does not decide how much testosterone it secretes. The pituitary does. It's just like if you walk into a room and you can't hear the music because it's not loud enough. You don't go over and mess with the speaker. You go to the tuner and you turn the signal up. So in this case, you can go to the pituitary, and the pituitary secretes two hormones. It secretes something called luteinizing hormone, which stimulates luteal cells to create testosterone, and something called follicle stimulating hormone, which stimulates follicular cells to create sperm. So if you want to raise the level of testosterone, you can mimic this hormonal pathway. HCG, gonadorelin, there are peptides that mimic this hormonal pathway and raise the level of testosterone naturally. So you're high on your own supply.
So is that like a peptide like CP1295?
CJC 1295?
Yeah,
so
one.
CJC 1295 is a class of peptides that are growth hormone releasing peptides.
Oh, okay.
So there's two of these. There's growth hormone releasing hormones and growth hormone releasing peptides. If you want to raise your natural pulse of growth hormone, because growth hormone in a human being is pulsatile.
Okay.
So if you don't want to take growth hormone from outside the body and put it in, which I am not a big fan of, because you do what's called upstream regulate, right? You have the growth hormone level rises in the bloodstream, tells the pituitary there's enough growth hormone, tells the hypothalamus there's enough growth hormone, tells the brain there's enough growth hormone. That's not the standard chain of command, right? There's a captain, a first mate, and a second mate. It goes brain, hypothalamus, pituitary, growth hormone. You want to obey that command hierarchy. So when you use a peptide, right, and growth hormone peptide, there's basically two classes. There's one called a growth hormone releasing hormone, one called a growth hormone releasing peptide. So if you use CJC 1295, you want to use another peptide called ipamorelin. You want to use those two in conjunction,
that's
or
what I heard.
sermorelin and ipamorelin. And this way, if you've recently had a pulse of growth hormone, and your largest pulse of growth hormone is at night, right before you go to bed, your largest circadian pulse. This is why most growth hormone peptides you take at night, and you can either take them by injection or sublingually.
Okay.
And what you're trying to do is increase that amplitude by having the pituitary naturally increase its pulse of growth hormone.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of peptides. I mean, I think peptides is the next rage in anti-aging, because there's peptides for healing, there's peptides for anxiety, there's anti-anxiolytic peptides like Selenk, there's healing peptides like BPC 157.
Right, we talked about that one.
That have-
Do you think they work?
Oh, I know that they work. I think they're phenomenally effective. BPC 157 it's a gastric pentadecapeptide. It's synthesized from gastric juice. It's tolerated very well orally. You can inject it into the site of an
Right.
injury, or you can take it orally, and it will find the site of injury. And basically, what it's doing is enhancing the body's ability to heal itself. Right. So if I can increase this signal from a tissue that's damaged into the bloodstream, then I can recruit more of the healing power of the human body, namely platelets that are bringing growth factors to the site of injury. I think when we talked before the break. So let's say you step off a curb and you twist your right ankle. How does the body know to heal the right ankle and not the left ankle? This is what we were talking about before the podcast. What happens is when you injure that tissue, when you have a tear in the tendon, you injure a special type of cell called a fibroblast, and it starts to send a signal into the bloodstream to say, "Hey, I'm hurt, I'm hurt, I'm hurt." And then there's a component in the blood called a platelet, and this platelet is cruising by, and a platelet's like a piñata, but the confetti that's inside is growth factors, right? So just like a piñata, you want it to burst,
right,
and all the candy to drop out. You want the platelet to burst and release the growth factors. So as it cruises by this site of injury, it hears this inflammatory signal and it bursts, and it drops off growth factors. Now, this is a little bit of a simplified approach. You science nerds, don't attack me on this. I'd be happy to go toe-to-toe in
Right.
science. But so it drops off growth factors, and this starts the healing process. BPC 157 accelerates that process. It's fantastic for leaky gut, for healing, the gut from injury, or from recovering from prolonged antibiotic use, or recovering from inflammatory conditions like irritable bowel syndrome or chronic Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. Very often BPC can be.
Is it good just for like a bad ankle, like tendonitis?
No question.
I know
It's good
people
for
swear by the
tendonitis.
BP 157.
I'm a huge fan of BPC 157.
Okay, let's get back to this testosterone, because
Okay.
I feel like so many people I know, my friends, girls too,
So
are on it. And I'm like, am I like the last of the party? Like, I'm not on it.
So what they should look at first is, does their body have the raw material it needs to produce testosterone? So if we look at how testosterone is produced in the human body, the deepest that you go into the roots is vitamin D3. So first you want to make sure that your vitamin D3 is between 60 and 80 nanograms per deciliter. And then if I move up the tree a little bit, you want to look at something called DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone. This is a precursor for hormones. If you are clinically deficient in D3 and clinically deficient in DHEA, you will be clinically deficient in testosterone. So the first thing we want to do is give the body the raw material to do its job. So we give it adequate levels of D3, adequate levels of DHEA, and very often the hormone levels will come back.
Okay.
And then the second thing you want to look at is you want to look for a specific protein in the blood called SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. It's a fancy way of saying a protein that binds to sex hormones. Okay. Very often in testosterone deficient men, especially if they are deficient in free testosterone, they have this very high levels of this protein. Women too. In fact, this protein is what they use as a birth control agent. So if you see high SHBG in females, very often it's their birth control. That crushes their testosterone level, especially their free testosterone.
What is this free test? What's the difference?
So testosterone, your total testosterone is the total amount of testosterone that's produced by the body.
And free?
The free testosterone is the amount of unbound testosterone that is bioavailable for the body to use.
Oh, okay.
That's really the number that matters because it's what's bioavailable to be used in all of the transactions in the body. I mean, a guy that's walking around with a testosterone of 1,000, but a free testosterone, making these numbers up for a second, but a free testosterone of 7, is not going to feel nearly as good as a guy with a level at 400, but his free testosterone is 18.
Now, is it as, because I think with men, it's been clear to me that the benefits far outweigh the negatives, right? Like
no question.
They're like all like super, their energy, they're more muscular, they look better, they have like whatever, their libido's up through the roof.
Yeah.
But women, I see more mass sometimes on women. You have worse side effects with women.
Well, because you don't want to take men or women to what's called supraphysiologic levels. I mean, women's testosterone, I see women's testosterone in the hundreds, right? I mean, it's like when...
Is that too much?
Yes, it's too much. I mean, women's testosterone in the 30 to 60 range, and their free testosterone, which is where their libido is going to come from. It's where something called erythropoiesis, the pressure on the bone marrow to produce red blood cells. In fact, in 2018, the Journal of American Urology issued new guidelines for testosterone therapy. And if you scroll down to line 13, you'll see that it says guidelines for physicians in the administration of testosterone therapy. It's line 13. If you actually read from 13 through numbers 20, so Google Journal of American Urology space testosterone, scroll down to line 13.
Okay.
Yeah, in the Google. And just read that section. Okay. So they updated all of their clinical guidelines on hormone therapy. They dispelled all the myths that testosterone increases the risk for cardiovascular disease. In fact, it's the opposite. They dispelled the myths that testosterone exacerbates prostate cancer. They dispelled the myth that increased levels of testosterone increase the risk for thrombolytic events, stroke, heart attacks, what have you. Yeah. It does thicken your blood, so you need to do therapeutic phlebotomy, blood donations. But that's also very, very good for men.
Oh, right.
And women, right?
So women too, you have to do that? Like you gotta
Well, if you look at the incidence of cardiovascular disease between men and women, you'll see that men lead women by a huge margin until women stop menstruating. And then there's a parabolic hockey stick spike and they begin to approximate men in the incidence of cardiovascular disease. The reason for that is that they stop turning their blood over.
Oh, that's right.
Right, they stop menstruating.
Yeah.
Menstruation is extraordinarily healthy, right? And it's also good for men to donate blood, right? Because something called our hematocrit, our blood viscosity, begins to thicken. So we measure the blood by the viscosity of the blood, which is called hematocrit, by how close are you to water or how close are you to motor oil. Okay, so as we approximate motor oil, as our hematocrit thickens, then it affects every organ system in the body. I mean, you could loosely put the body in, organ systems into two categories, pumps and filters. A pump would much rather pump water than pump oil. So the heart, the vascular system, the filters, the kidney, the liver, would much rather filter water than filter oil. Right. So if we can keep the blood viscosity low by checking your hematocrit, and when it gets high, doing something called therapeutic phlebotomy, actually dumping blood, it's extraordinarily healthy for you. Your body replaces every one of those red blood cells with healthy new red blood cells.
Right, yeah.
So this is why I say everybody should be doing two things. One, getting their blood work done at a minimum every 6 months. And they should look at blood sugar control, hormone balance, and nutrient deficiencies. Just start there. If you want to know exactly what panel I would suggest you pull, and you don't have to pull the panel through me, I'll put it on my Instagram at Gary Brecka, and you can just take my male panel and take it to your doctor, or the female panel. And then the second thing is you got to look at these 5 genes of methylation. You have to know what your body is able to convert into the usable form and what it's not. If you start there, you're going to feel a state of normal that you thought never existed. You know, people say to me all the time, "Oh my God, I feel amazing." I'm like, well, you don't really feel amazing. You just feel normal. That's how normal is supposed to feel.
Okay, so before you move on from the testosterone, what should a woman's, what should the number be around?
So age dependent, it should be between 30 and 60.
In what age group?
Women between 28 years old and 55 years old.
30 to 60. That is amazing that you said that. You know why? There's been a million. Mine's so much less, but I feel that there's such a rampage. People are on these pellets. That's the biggest thing.
Right.
That they're pumping up. People my age, in their 40s, are doing 200, 300.
Right,
Women.
but you have to look at their free testosterone, number one, and then secondly, you want to look at the level of free testosterone. So, and to control free testosterone, number one, I need to have low SHBG. And then secondly, to stimulate the production of testosterone before you start to take any hormone from outside the body and put it in. Because when I take something exogenously from outside the body and put it in, I'm potentially creating a dependency, right? It can shut off my own endogenous production. This is why I'm a huge fan of peptides. They usually have you high on your own supply. They usually have.
But why are you on testosterone then and not on the peptide? Because of your issue?
I have, what's called primary hypogonadism, which meant that I used a luteinizing hormone mimetic called HCG to try to raise my testosterone level. It didn't work, so I replaced my hormones, right? But we go to replacement so fast. But I'm also 53 years old. There's a lot of guys that are, I know, thank you. Yeah. There's a lot of guys that are doing this in their 20s. In their 30s,
I know.
Creating permanent dependency.
Crazy, I know.
I also sit on the board of the NFL Alumni Association, Athletica. I'm one of their health services directors. So I see what happens when people prolong, potentially abuse exogenous hormones and growth hormones and other things that shut down their body's production. So first thing we want to do is find out if the body has the raw materials to do its job. All right, D3, DHEA, SHBG out of the way. So that we can allow these hormone levels to return to normal. Because the issue with hormones, and the little known fact about testosterone, is one of its primary roles is not male characteristics. One of the primary roles of testosterone is something called erythropoiesis, which is the production of new red blood cells. So as your testosterone drops, the pressure on the bone marrow to make new red blood cells drops. So your red blood cell count and hemoglobin level drops. And what does that mean? Just think of a red blood cell as a tennis ball and hemoglobin as the fluid that's inside that tennis ball. It's actually inside that fluid that oxygen is bound. So there's a normal range for red blood cells, right? So if you're in the bottom 10, 15% of that range, okay, you're low on red blood cells, but you're normal. Okay, you're going to be low on blood oxygen. Then you look at your hemoglobin, and there's a range for hemoglobin. Let's say you're in the bottom 10, 15% of hemoglobin. Well, you're not anemic, but you're exhausted all the time. Your doctor says your blood work's normal.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. And this is the problem. So you go get your blood work done. The doctor says there's nothing wrong with you. Your red blood cell's normal. Your hemoglobin's normal. Get stress out of your life. Get some more sleep. Drink more water. The truth is, that's not normal. It's certainly not optimal. We want to be in the upper range for red blood cells, the upper range for hemoglobin. How does this happen? You go to the factory that makes red blood cells, which is the bone marrow, and you go to the bone marrow's boss, which is the hormone testosterone. If you are clinically deficient in testosterone, you will be low on red blood cell and hemoglobin, and you will be tired all the time. And not only will you be tired during the day, but you won't be able to sleep at night. And this is one of the hardest questions that is hard for physicians to answer when you say, why is it that people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst? Because you would think that somebody that's exhausted, the one thing they would do is sleep, is because they're both related to blood oxygen, right? So if I reduce the amount of oxygen in your blood, you're going to be tired. But now when you lay down to go to sleep at night and your respiratory rate starts to fall and the blood oxygen level in your blood begins to drop, as that blood oxygen level gets to a critical level, your brain, which is monitoring your blood oxygen, panics, and it wakes you up. How does it wake you up? It pulses cortisol. So you look like a bouncing rubber ball going down a hallway, right? Your brain does not allow you to get into deep sleep, right? It pulls you out of deep sleep to raise the oxygen level in your blood. So if you fix the hormones, you can very often fix the blood oxygen level, you fix the energy and the sleep. That's why it's so important to get blood work done.
It's so important. What about like, what about fasting?
So, fasting is like anything else, like keto or anything else. Right. It's not for everybody. Right.
I don't like it. I like to eat breakfast. Am I a horrible person for it?
No, not at all.
I like it.
No, you would be, if you like to eat 3 meals a day, that's fine. It's people that have blood sugar control issues should be doing fasting. But people that have very reactive blood sugar should not be intermittent fasting. In fact, some of the worst endocrine disasters I've ever seen in young females are young females with a very tight feeding window. If you really want to jack your metabolism up, narrow your feeding window if you have good blood sugar regulation. Because let's not forget.
What do you mean? Say that again. So if you want to increase your metabolism or increase your...
So there's three things that we should look at it in terms of how well you regulate your blood sugar. There's something called glucose, which is the amount of sugar in your blood at the moment your blood was taken. There's something called hemoglobin A1C. It's a fancy way of saying the 3-month average of your blood sugar. Yeah. And then we look at insulin, how much insulin it takes to regulate that. So if your hemoglobin A1C is low.
But you don't know if it is. No one.
Well, this is why you need to test your blood. This is why, everythinging's not for everybody.
100%. That's why it's so important. Like, that's why you're the people, you're trying to be as specific as possible with being generic, just to help everyone. You can't. It's hard though because everyone's numbers are different.
Exactly. You need information about yourself to make decisions on how you should eat and whether or not you should intermittent fast. So, for example, if you have...
what are you going to say with the girls?
If your average blood sugar is very low, so if your hemoglobin A1C is between 4.8 and 5.1, even 5.2, you should not be intermittent fasting because this means that your average blood sugar is very low. Okay, so when you fast, it will get even lower. The pituitary, which is the master regulator in the body, it's regulating your hormones, your menstrual cycle. If you're female, it's regulating your body temperature, your metabolism. The pituitary perceives prolonged periods of low blood sugar as starvation. So it starts to throttle back your metabolism, right? It also can make females what's called monophasic. Or aphasic. It can actually throw their menstrual cycle out of phase. So as they transition from follicular to luteal to ovulation phases, the one hormone enters that phase before the other one. Estrogen leads progesterone. And now you've got a wicked temper. You've got emotional control issues. You've got weight gain. You've got water retention. You start to become estrogen dominant. You start to put a little band of water. Actually, it's water retention in the interstitial space, the space between cells, below your belly button. And you think you're doing everything right. So I have women that I see all the time. They're like, Gary, I don't get it. I wake up in the morning, I'm fasted. I have a cup of black coffee. I go to Orange Theory. I go hammer down for 55 minutes. I do that 5 days a week. I've been doing that for 3 months. I haven't lost a single pound. So I just to finish intermittent fasting, it's intermittent fasting like keto, like any other diet is not for everybody, right? And people with poor blood sugar control, obesity, hyperinsulinemia, high insulin, elevated blood sugar over a prolonged period of time, intermittent fasting can be the best thing that ever happened to them. Okay. But especially when women tighten their feeding window, so women eat in a 4-hour, 6-hour, even an 8-hour window. If they have very aggressive blood sugar control, they will send their hormones into a tailspin and they will begin to slow their metabolism down. It will have the exact opposite effect of what they're after. That's why I always say people need information, and you need information on yourself. Don't get your information even from your doctor or your girlfriend or your neighbor, your trainer. Get it from your blood and your own genes, because it will be a fact pattern. I always like to say, what's not in your blood is somebody else's opinion, right?
That's a good one, actually.
And that's why I love the blood work. And like I said, I'll give you the male and the female panel that I pull on clients. You look at that panel, it's not paralysis of analysis. You look at blood sugar control, nutrient deficiencies, and hormone balance. And that's where you start. And you get a roadmap. You get to understand your body. You look at the 5 major genes of methylation. You start supplementing for those genes of methylation. It is astounding what will happen to your body when you just change those 2 things. Just that bit of information.
Because then what I was going to say is that allergies and etc. Like again, analysis paralysis. That's what I was going to say. I went and got my blood work panel. Like, it was insane how much blood was taken. And I spent hours on it with the phone with this really renowned person. And I eat eggs every day, right? And for like 25 years, like the same. My whole thing is like routine, habits, hacking, blah blah blah.
Right.
And so I eat eggs every single day from almost my whole adult life. And he says, no, well, you're allergic to eggs. That's why you're having all these other allergic reactions. And that, also about heavy metals and blah, 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 and what my body's depleted. So then I go down that whole rabbit hole, right? And then I talk to someone else and they'll tell me something, another renowned person will tell me something else. How in God's name are people supposed to, know, like, who to listen to?
Well, here's the issue with allergy testing, and here's again what the basic premise of what I'm saying is. We have to get back to basic physiology, nutrient deficiencies, blood sugar control. What is my body deficient in? We should always start there and put the raw materials back into the body that it needs to do its job, and then get out of its way. And you will see either the expression of optimal health, or you will see the expression of other conditions, and you can continue to go down the rabbit hole. A lot of times, I mean, if you get a 23andMe, you're going to get paralysis of analysis with that much
That's
gene
what I'm
information.
saying. So much information.
I'm going to know that you have detached earlobes, and you have green eyes, and you have olive skin, you have dark hair, and you have a propensity for hypertension. But there's nothing you can do with the majority of that information. You want actionable information.
You just said it. I need actionable. What can change? But then why is it though the allergy part? Like, could we be everyone now? Like you were saying, I'm gluten, I'm wheat. Like,
in my opinion, most allergy testing is very 1998 science, unless it's mediator release testing or some other type of testing. So in most allergy tests, what we do is we take your blood, we wash it down a membrane. Okay, so we wash your blood down one side, and we wash an allergen down the other side: blueberries, wheat, corn, soy, dairy, whatever it is. We wash it down the other side, and we look at the level of inflammation. In other words, how pissed off does the blood get jumping across that membrane? So how much inflammation does it cause? And you measure that between a 1 and a 10. Okay, so if it's a 1 to 3, that's a mild allergy. If it's a 3 to 6, that's a moderate allergy. If it's a 6 to 10, that's a severe allergy. And we say eliminate those foods. The challenge with most allergy testing is it does not take into account your already inflamed state. So in other words, what if you're already at a 6 and you test something, it shows up as a 2 in your blood, but on the test it shows an 8. In other words, let's say I have 2 people standing side by side, and I go, okay, I'm going to press in on each of your backs, and you tell me how much pain you feel. I'm going to push in with a pressure of 2. So I push in on the first person's back, and they go, I barely felt that. And I push in on the second person's back with the same pressure, and they go through the roof. They record a pain level of 10 because they had a pinched nerve. So they were already at an 8. So do you see that pressure of 2 in one person wasn't felt? The pressure of 2 in somebody else recorded as a 10, okay? It wasn't the actual pressure that caused the reading of 10. It was their existing state being at an 8. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
So when you have inflammatory factors in the blood, certain cytokines and things like homocysteine, which is what I was talking about, you are already in an inflamed state. So you're going into the test, let's say, at a 6. So things that just show up as minor allergens jump off of this test. And then they bring this allergy test into me, and they're like, I'm allergic to wheat, soy, dairy, corn, blueberries, bananas, and gluten. I go, whoa, slow down.
Right.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if you actually had this entire myriad of injuries. I mean, not of allergies, not injuries, allergies. And so first we want to look at gut motility. Right? Is the conveyor belt moving at the right pace? Because if the conveyor belt's not moving at the right pace, you will chase allergies for the balance of your lifetime. And this is what happens to most people. They go, I don't get it. I eat the same thing Monday morning and the same thing Wednesday afternoon, and I have two completely different reactions. Sometimes I can eat corn and I blow up like a tick, and sometimes I eat corn and I don't have any reaction. Okay, right there, I know you're not allergic to corn, right? Allergies are not transient. They are consistent.
Right.
So if you were allergic to eggs, you would have a reaction every time you ate eggs.
Maybe I do. Maybe that's why maybe I'm bloated because of eggs. I don't even know.
You don't look bloated to me, but
I don't. Well, I feel it, but thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it's important too that we get back to basic physiology. If the intestinal motility is off, your allergy test is going to be off because contents are going to putrefy in the intestine, and we're not going to pass things properly along the sequence of events in the intestine. If we remove too much water, constipation. If we add too much water, diarrhea. And so we get all of this myriad of symptoms, and then we put it in a bucket where we just give it a name like irritable bowel syndrome, which is not really a thing. It's just a name for a bunch of symptoms. And we don't have a way of treating it. And so we wander around trying all of these diets. And yes, very often going carnivore can cure all kinds of challenges you're having in the body. But even on carnivore, you want to make sure that your intestinal motility is correct.
So I'm curious, what's your...
Or keto or vegan.
Or whatever it is, right? Two questions I'm left with. Poor Stage. You've been sitting there so patiently and so kind. Same with you, Ed. I know this is like godly going on forever. But two other questions. The first one is, I want to know the first one's going to be about all your habits, what you do from what time you wake up, what's your whole thing. But before I even get into that, I wanted to really ask you, I've noticed, I had no clue who you were until very recently. I would say within a year or so. Carrie Kasem is a very close friend of mine. She's actually talked about you before. Oh. But it was kind of chirping in my head. But then all of a sudden, I saw you everywhere. Now, is it because you got involved with this 10X? Now it's 10X? Because you said you had this business. You started to kind of get a lot of recognition because of the results you had. What happened? What was the kind of the evolution of how people started to really know about your information and how did people on a grandiose, more bigger scale know about what you're doing? I guess is my question.
Well, I think, in the fifth year of our business, we started treating a patient named Grant Cardone.
Oh, so it was a Grant, or was it Dana White?
Well, we met Dana after Grant. Carrie Kasem introduced me to Dana White. She said Dana had done so many things for her, and she was like, I don't know how I'm going to repay Dana. So I'm going to introduce you to Dana because he needs you. And Dana, when I first met him, had no interest in talking to me about his blood work or his gene tests. All he wanted to know was how many more months he had left on Earth.
Why? Because he read the same thing I did?
He's sick that way. He'll tell you, I'm just...
Yeah, but I wanted to know,
I'm just sick in the head, and I just wanted to know how long I had left to live. And he was like, he was so curious about it. So...
by the way, can you still do that? Can you tell me how long I'm going to live for?
I could, but I don't do that anymore. I left that industry 7 years ago for a reason. I could still do it. Yeah, I'd have to go back into a mortality database and have access to that information, but I could still do the probabilistic calculation. Did you tell it to him? I did. He's the only one that I've done since I left that industry. I've done one person, and it was Dana White. Why did you do him? Because I knew that would be the access to me getting a hold of his blood work and his gene test.
Oh, gotcha.
And so I told him those two things were a requirement for me to predict his life expectancy, which in reality they weren't. If I had gotten 10 years of medical records on him and some demographic data, I could have modeled his life expectancy. But I could look at Dana. The first day that I met him, he was actually very sick the first day I met him. And I said, would you like me to come over there and knock that out of you in 45 minutes? And he was sniffling and really stuffed up. And Dana, he's very straightforward. He goes, yeah, pal, come over here and knock it out of me in 45 minutes. He was being very sarcastic. And I said, no, Dana, I'm serious. I'll come over there in 45 minutes. I'll knock that out of you. And I brought a nurse with me. Again, I'm not licensed to practice medicine. I brought something called a Hypermax, which is 900 liters of oxygen.
That's
and
from
a
the
mask.
Superhuman Protocol.
Yeah, from the Superhuman Protocol.
Yeah.
I actually called Da Vinci Medical. I'll never forget this. I called my buddy Jason at Da Vinci Medical, the CEO of Da Vinci, and I said, listen, I'm going to see Dana White. There's got to be a Hypermax within 5 miles of the UFC Apex. And he was like, let me make some phone calls. And he called around and he actually found a doctor that had a Hypermax in his clinic. And I was like, I'll pay him $500 to bring it to the UFC right now and to the Performance Center. First time I met Dana. And so this car pulls up with
a huge,
it's a 900 liter bag of oxygen,
know.
right? It's like 6 feet tall. So I dragged this thing into the UFC through the lobby onto the elevator. They thought I was out of my freaking mind. And it had an oxygen mask. I had a nurse with me, that was licensed in Nevada. And I drag in this 900 liter bag of oxygen. Dana's sitting there, he's sniffling, his eyes are swollen shut. He's super stuffy, his throat's super scratchy. And I ran a specific vitamin cocktail on him with high doses of vitamin C and carnosine and some other things. And the nurse starts this IV, and at the same time I put this oxygen mask on him. It's about 93, 95% O2. And I had him breathe down all 900 liters of that oxygen. The nurse ran the IV, and he takes this mask off, and he looks at me, and he goes, exact words, he goes, "No fucking way." And I go, "What?" He's like, "Is there any way I could feel this good that fast?" He's like, "I'm not stuffy anymore at all." He's like, "I feel freaking great." And he was like, started jumping around his office, and he was out of his mind. He was like, "That was crazy, man." I said, "Well, all it was vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and oxygen." And so then I convinced him to get the blood work and the gene test done. And that's when things really took a crazy turn because, we got a call at 1 o'clock in the morning from the lab saying that we had a life-threatening alert on a patient, and it was Dana White.
What was it? What was it?
It was his triglyceride level, almost at 800. So he had something called hyperinsulinemia. He had elevated insulin. He was almost diabetic. He was pre-diabetic. Again, all of this is public information. Dana and I we've done a podcast with his medical records. I would never talk about a patient on a podcast like this, but not a patient, a client. But he had hyperinsulinemia. He had elevated blood sugar. He was hypertriglyceridemic. His triglycerides were nearly 800. His thyroid was a mess. He had one of the highest levels of homocysteine I'd ever had. There was no wonder he had hypertension. All of these different conditions. His kidney filtration rate was actually an early stage kidney failure. His blood urea nitrogen, creatinine were really elevated. It was just, everything was a total mess. And I said, "Look, if you just do what I tell you to do for 10 weeks, you're gonna be a completely different person. But if not, right now you have 10.4 years to live."
You gave him that a number, 10.4.
10.4 years. So if you assume that none of those issues change, when you do a mortality prediction, you assume that none of those are going to change, right? He didn't change the triglycerides. He didn't treat the hyperinsulinemia, which was on its way to type 2 diabetes. He didn't treat the hypertension, better than it was being treated. So now you have metabolic syndrome. Basically, you have high blood pressure, you have high blood sugar, and you have high body fat around your middle. This is a really bad sign. It's called metabolic syndrome. And you don't actually have to be obese to have metabolic syndrome. Very young adults are getting metabolic syndrome, and we can catch it early and change the trajectory of their life. Modern medicine waits for it to exacerbate itself and show up as type 2 diabetes or as severe hypertension or as morbid obesity. But in any case, he had all three of these conditions for metabolic syndrome. His adrenals were shot. And so I told him, I said, "If you don't turn this around, you got 10.4 years to live. But if you give me 10 weeks, give my clinical team 10 weeks, because our physicians are the one that are the real geniuses behind the scenes, I'll completely change your life." And we brought his homocysteine down. His blood pressure started to normalize. We fixed the thyroid by fixing the methylation in the gut. So his T3 levels started to rise. His thyroid normalized. I put him on a prescription ketogenic diet. I don't do that with everybody. I call it a prescription ketogenic diet because I wrote a diet right down to his grocery list. So for 10 weeks, we did what's called a ketogenic reset for 12 weeks. So he intermittent fasted and ate full clean keto. And we put his body into a state of ketosis. He started to metabolize the triglycerides right out of his bloodstream. It's kind of a hard concept for people to think, I have high blood fat, so I'm going to go on a high-fat diet to bring down my blood fat. But that's truly what you want to do. You want to switch the fuel source to beta-hydroxybutyrate and have the triglycerides start to fall. And in 12 weeks, blood pressure had normalized. His triglycerides were at 140 from almost 800. He went from hyperinsulinemic to normal insulin. He went from diabetic to non-diabetic to normopathic blood sugar. It was a phenomenal change, and he lost so much weight and got off a CPAP machine and stopped having these narcoleptic episodes during the day. It just completely changed his life. So he stuck with it until the end of 5 months. And then when we looked at his labs at 5 months, I mean, his kidneys, his liver, his lungs, his pancreas, his immune system, I mean, just everything had strengthened.
So because of that, it just kind of steamrolled.
Yeah, so Grant Cardone bought our company in September of 2021. And he bought us for some cash and some stock. So Sage and I became Grant Cardone's partner and Brandon Dawson's partner, his CEO, who's also the CEO of 10X Health.
Yeah.
And they are scaling experts. So they basically took our brainchild and said, we're going to put systems in place to scale this business. And we went from 9 employees to 120. 112 employees.
Do you have like little clinics everywhere?
Yeah, we have mega centers. So we have one in Aventura. We actually have 2 in Aventura. We have one in Dallas. We have one in Beverly Hills. We have one in Arizona.
There's one in Beverly Hills. Where?
San Vicente and 6th.
But what do you mean? Is it like an office where people can go in
10X Health Clinic. Yeah, and we want to open 1,000 of them around the country.
What's in the clinic?
Red light therapy bed. So the PMF, the oxygen, the light, and you can get your blood work and your gene test done there.
Wait, did you have the Superhuman?
We have the Superhuman Protocol.
Got it. You have it there. Okay. What else do you have in there?
So then we also do a lot of joint injections with stem cells and exosomes.
So it's like a med spa.
Yeah, and we also do topical, exosome facial treatments, exosome hair restoration, stem cell hair restoration, things like a med spa. But the core of what we do is we do a 74 biomarker test in the blood, and we look at the main 5 with their alleles 8 genes of methylation, and that I believe is the foundation from decades of reading medical records and looking at the trajectory of what could you most easily change to completely change the trajectory of somebody's life: nutrient deficiencies, hormone balance, blood sugar control.
I love that. Now, okay, I gotta go at 7:30. My kid, I cannot believe this. I love talking to you, and I know, and I feel bad. My kid's probably like starving upstairs. But I have one fact. Okay, say it in like 2 minutes. What is your daily habits start? What do you do? So
my daily habits are really centered around my morning routine. Never, ever, ever, ever do I ever miss breath work. Okay. I mean, I will actually miss a commercial flight to not miss breath work. So I do 8 minutes of breath work, 3 rounds of 30 breaths with a breath hold in between.
Okay.
Like clockwork. That's how I wake up. I drink hydrogen water. I actually carry a hydrogen water filtration bottle with me. I supplement for my deficiencies. And I get natural sunlight at first light every morning that I wake up, no matter where I am. Tomorrow morning, I'll wake up here with the sun. I'll be outside on my balcony. I'll do breath work, and I'll expose my skin to sunlight. I generally will try to ground every day, get my feet touching the surface of the earth. 3 days a week, I do heavyweight exercise. The other days of the week, I do basic steady state cardiovascular exercise.
So
I'm not an
cardio?
exercise nut. No. 3 days heavy weights. So I try to take each muscle group to failure, what's called the drop set. And I try to use heavier weights because we know that muscle is our metabolic currency, right? And so if we can actually, it's almost like a retirement account. We actually need to build more muscle than we need today so that by the time we start to get to the years of sarcopenia, age-related muscle wasting, we can actually afford the muscle wasting and still be functional.
Because you lose every year.
Frailty is the greatest risk to longevity.
Absolutely.
Right.
So 3 days of heavy, why don't you do 5 days a week?
Because I also don't want to overstress my body. I don't.
That's what's good about it. What I've noticed is sequencing is very important with you, like in order of things, and like keeping things so you're not overdoing it, not underdoing it.
Yeah.
Like it's like kind of like the Goldilocks. It's like the perfect amount, right?
Yeah,
the Goldilocks
and then you
approach.
also
That's
don't have to be
company
obsessive about it too, right?
Yeah, it's so true. It's so hard though not to become obsessive.
Yeah, it's what I do. It's not who I am.
Yeah.
Right. So, I don't do it necessarily to look good taking my shirt off. I do it because this is the recipe for longevity.
Right.
If you want to live a long time, lift heavy weight.
Do you think you could overdo it and
I do
too much? Like work out too much?
No question. I mean, a lot of extreme athletes have reduced life expectancies. We saw a lot of, when we would see really extreme athletes in the mortality space, almost invariably we would reduce their life expectancy because of the amount of free radical oxidation that's going on in their body. And they're also more prone to cancers later in life, and they don't live as long as people
Because
that
of
don't
what?
exercise intensely. Because
stress hormone.
high intensity exercise will not only wear the joints out over time, but it produces a lot of free radical oxidation, and these oxidative species damage tissues. And so I'm not saying that, in your younger years, if you want to be a Spartan athlete or you want to be a triathlete. I was a triathlete. In 2010, I was the age group champion for the state of Florida. I was a really competitive, not a professional, I was an amateur, but I was very competitive. But I remember after my last, half Ironman in Chesapeake Bay, I hung my bike up on the wall. I didn't get on my bike again for 3 years. Because it was just the amount of intensity was too much to keep up with. So we need to make longevity something that we can do for a long period of time.
For a long period of time.
So things like grip strength and functional movements and air squats and learning how to dead hang, just basic movements that are proven to have a correlation to longevity.
But you don't think doing weights every day is a good idea?
No.
Even if forget about extreme, how about just intermediate, moderate?
Well, if you're going to do it intermediate or moderate, you're really kind of defeating the purpose. Right? So the whole idea of doing weights is to tear muscle. So if you're going to go into tear muscle, go into tear muscle. Don't go into just move the weight around, right? Or else you're just wasting time.
Yeah.
And so, 3 days a week, if you do heavy weights, you take each body part completely to failure. And I'll start with heavy weight, and I'll do what's called a drop set to failure. And when you're done, you're exhausted. You've really challenged your body. You've created a lot of muscle hypertrophy, torn muscle that's going to grow back larger. You've created some muscle hyperplasia, new tissue growth, and you haven't worn your joints out, and you haven't stressed your body. Look at the past, Mr. Olympias. These guys go up on the stage to hand trophies out to each other in wheelchairs and walkers. You don't want to borrow from your future. I'm trying to push the future out, not borrow from it. And so, the more extreme you are with these diets, and I live by the 80-20 rule, the more extreme you are with dieting and lifestyle and even spiritual well-being or exercise, the more you are borrowing from the future, the less likely you are to be able to sustain it over a lifetime.
Will you promise to come back?
Yeah.
I'm serious. You promise?
Yeah, promise.
No, I'm serious. I'm not. Even if I say that all the time, I don't. I mean it with you. Okay. Gary Brecka. Okay. 10X Health. Look, follow him on Instagram. Follow him. You're literally a wealth of information.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate you coming on this podcast.
Yeah, I really had a lot of fun. The time flew. Habits and hustle.
Habits and hustle. Don't forget it. And anything else you want to share, where people can find you?
If they want to, you can find me at Gary Brecka, GaryBrecka. All I do is teach on Instagram. I don't have a bunch of stuff to sell, so if you like what you heard today, I take deeper dives on Instagram. I'm starting on my own podcast called The Ultimate Human. It'll launch in about a month. I've got about a dozen episodes filmed so far.
I love it.
Because my heroes are the PhDs and the MDs and the researchers of the world that are doing real research on real human beings and doing real groundbreaking things. So I've interviewed some really brilliant minds, the top minds in water, in resveratrol, in supplementation, in cosmetics, in all kinds of different areas, but they're mostly PhDs, MDs, researchers, the guys behind the scenes that no one knows. Those are my heroes.
I love that.
I'm going to interview the CEO or the founder of Prolon Fasting, Dr. Walter Longo.
Oh, I love him. Yeah,
arguably the world's authority on fasting. So look for the Ultimate Human podcast, and if you want to get the genetic test, you can go to 10x, the number 10, the letter X, healthtest.com.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Awesome.